was manipulated his entire life, sacrificing his body and decades of his life. His name was Mugek, a man who defeated the greatest masters in the world. But when he grew old, those who used him decided to discard him. That was when he discovered the whole truth. On that day, he ended up returning to the past. Now he knows who betrayed him. So Mugek isolated himself in the mountains and began to train. He lifted stones, climbed cliffs, and swung his sword day and night, all for one single goal: to massacre those who manipulated him. Under the full moon, he finally agrees to accept a drink from the host. Inside the room, the two sit face to face to talk. Ryongja Gui remarks that he's waited for decades, calling the other man cold-hearted. He then pours a drink into his special guest's small cup. Recalling the past, he says they were much younger back then. He just watches his companion, remaining silent for a moment. The swordsman then comments that it must have been 40 years. He continues, saying that's when he met the man before him. Going back in time, his younger self was asking to be sent to the past. Faced with the bold request, the older man is left completely speechless. Standing in the hall, they were discussing the reversal of the heavenly cycles. He explains that this was the ultimate technique and the legacy of his clan. Despite getting close, he confesses he had to give up on the research. Angrily, he crumples the papers because the 5 components were impossible. He stresses that it was impossible to gather all the items in one place. Smiling, he agrees to perform the ritual if all the items are brought to him. First on the list, he names the Thunderbell from the Wind River sect. Next, he mentions the Censor of Divine Mysteries from the Heavenly Dragon clan. He also asks for the essence of a 10,000-year-old carp. And lastly, he speaks of the evil spirit from the demonic cult. Remembering this, he explains that the man gathered all the items over the decades. Back in the present, he confesses that he even thought the warrior was dead. Impressed, he can hardly believe it, and asks how he managed to accomplish such a feat. After a sip, the swordsman says he cursed the ritual when he heard the list. Ryongja Gui just listens in silence, holding his own drink. Thinking about the past, he notes that the man is no longer a youth. Taking a drink, he finally asks why he wishes to go back in time. With force, the warrior places his bowl back on the table. Staring intently, he replies that his only reason for going back is revenge. At this answer, the old man is completely shocked and speechless. He questions if revenge is impossible, wanting to know who he is fighting against. With a serious look, the warrior prepares to give his final answer. He then reveals that his target's name is the fearsome Mugi Hua. In a flashback, it's shown that the great pillars of Murim were all killed. Not even Cheonma, the powerful heavenly demon, could escape the massacre. Mugi Hua, the one without equal, was the one who defeated all the great masters. Alone, he became the only one at the top of Murim's sky. Back in the present, the old man says this is madness, an impossible request. Ignoring the warning, he states that he doesn't care what it takes. Looking at the old man, he reveals that Cheonma was actually his father. The new information leaves the host once again completely stunned. He clarifies that he isn't doing this out of grief for his father's death. Confused, the old man asks what the real reason behind it all would be then. He explains that Mugi spared no one, not even the innocents of the clan. Finding it hard to believe, the old man asks why he would do such a thing. He says he needs to go back in time to defeat him and ask why. Hearing the plan, the old master remains silent for a brief moment. Then he asks if he can ask for a favor, if the ritual truly works. With a serious look, he asks the warrior to look for him in the past. Not understanding the reason, the swordsman asks what he should do after that. The old man then reveals that he must prevent his wedding from happening. At that moment, a strong tremor begins to shake the entire structure of the place. Surprised by the unusual request, the warrior stares at the old man for a moment. He starts to laugh, finding it funny, but the old man says it's not a joke. Agreeing to the favor, he affirms that this is now a promise between them. Calling him to the ritual, he stands up and stumbles a little. He explains that an arm and an eye were sacrifices to obtain the spirit. At the ritual site, the necessary artifacts were all in position. Holding the small box, he prepares to release the final component. Opening the container, he finally unleashes the powerful evil spirit of the cult. As it's released, the evil spirit begins to take over the entire area. The old master then recites the incantation, activating the sacred bell. Soon after, the censor and the essence also react to the ritual's power. Concentrating all his strength, he channels the energy of the 4 sacred items. Suddenly, a large amount of energy manifests in the center of the room. Then a large portal begins to form right in front of him. Astonished, he watches the portal's formation with wide eyes. Seeing that it worked, he shouts proudly, saying he finally did it. Turning to his friend, he asks if he can see his great achievement, but as he looks, he realizes the warrior is no longer nearby. Fallen on the ground, the swordsman seems to have been affected by the ritual's power. Looking at the portal, his expression changes completely as he makes a decision. With a fixed gaze, he prepares to do something totally unexpected. Swallowing hard, he looks in his friend's direction and apologizes for this. Running towards the portal, he shouts that he's very sorry. Lying on the ground, He swears he will find him to warn him of the disaster. Walking towards the portal, the old man says this was his dream. Suddenly, he stops abruptly when he hears an order not to move. Trying to move forward, he realizes his body is completely paralyzed. Appearing from behind, the warrior asks how he could do that to him. Frightened, the old man stammers, trying to make an excuse for his betrayal. The swordsman then says that he, of all people, should know better. Shouting in anger, he lands a powerful punch right in his face. With the impact, his teeth break, and he screams in pain on the floor. Crying, the old man apologizes, saying he lost his mind with the opportunity. He continues, saying he shouldn't have done it after everything. The warrior just stares at him in silence, listening to the apology. Extending his hand, he approaches the old master on the ground. Helping the old man up, he explains that his selfishness helped him. Through gritted teeth, he warns that if it were anyone else, they would already be dead. He says the old man is an exception, forgiving his desperate act. Thanking him for waiting his whole life, he calls him a friend. The two face each other, the old master crying and the warrior observing him. Crying heavily, he tries to apologize once more, saying he is so sorry. The tears continue to fall down his face without stopping for a moment. Then, the old man's body begins to disappear, and the warrior asks what is happening. He continues to fade into the air, slowly vanishing before his eyes. Suddenly, the scene freezes, and several butterflies appear around them. Noticing everything has stopped, he says that time and space have frozen. Confused, he turns to his friend and asks what is going on. An unknown voice then announces that he has passed all the tests. Soon after, a divine and imposing figure appears floating in the room. Understanding nothing, the swordsman turns and asks who he is. The entity reveals that he is the one who can send him back to the past. Questioning his actions, he asks how he would defy the natural order. Revealing the truth, he says that the sacrifices made were the true requirement. He explains that forgiving Ryangja was the final test for him to pass. The entity congratulates him, saying he overcame the most difficult stage with ease. Since he passed the tests, he asks the great entity to grant his wish. Then the entity asks what he intends to do when he goes back in time. Smiling, he replies that he will kill the culprits and save all the innocents. At that, the entity asks what regrets he carries with him. Shouting, he reveals that he regrets everything, as he never lived his own life. Hearing his outburst, the divine entity just watches him with a serene expression. With interest, the entity says it will watch his new life attentively. At that instant, the butterflies gain color, and time returns to normal. Seeing his friend back, he admits he doesn't quite know what to say. He remains silent, processing everything that just happened there. His friend then reminds him not to forget the request about the wedding. Turning his face, the warrior just listens to his companion's final reminder. Bidding his friend farewell, he walks directly towards the time portal. Watching him leave, the old man shouts desperately, trying to get his attention. He then screams that it's a promise as the warrior disappears. In the blink of an eye, he opens his eyes in a new era. Arriving in the past, he finds himself in the middle of a very agitated crowd. Observing his surroundings, he analyzes the situation he is now in. In front of a statue, he realizes he has finally managed to go back in time. Meanwhile, the entire crowd celebrates and shouts in celebration of the event. With a smile on his face, he confirms that he really has returned to the past. Suddenly, he spots something in front of him that leaves him very surprised. His expression changes completely when he sees who is at the center of attention. Looking at the platform, he sees a familiar figure on the main throne. Seated on the throne, the great leader observes the crowd with an imposing air. He stares at the powerful figure who is the great heavenly demon, his father. Turning his face, the young warrior calls for his father in a low voice. Attentive, the father seems to notice something coming directly from the crowd. With a calm expression, the young warrior watches the entire scene intently. Then a challenger shouts, asking how long the young master will make him wait. Slamming his giant sword on the ground, he shatters part of the arena floor. He then yells, demanding that the fight begin at once. Facing his opponent, he simply agrees to finally begin the great confrontation. Smiling, he begins to tell everyone that this is a special day. He then declares that the day of the demon's challenge has finally arrived. Announcing his decision, Cheonma warned that succession would not be limited to his bloodline. With this news, everyone in the sect was stirred by the new opportunity. To make it official, he organized a martial arts tournament called the Demon's Challenge. To the victor, he offered the chance to challenge one of his sons for a wish. Taunting the young master, the challenger says there's still time to give up. He just stares at his opponent, ready for the fight that is about to begin. Without a word, he remains calm as he watches the man before him. Remembering that day, he recalls the insult of being chosen as an opponent. But he remembers there was another reason his rival chose him. In a flashback, he explains that his food was sabotaged with a paralyzing poison. Because of that trick, he was humiliatingly defeated in the duel. Desperate, he tried to tell his father about the sabotage, but got no response. He remembers receiving only a cold, disapproving look from the great Cheonma. After the loss, he trained recklessly, distancing himself from the line of succession. Coming to a conclusion, he understands that defeat was the start of all his failures. Back in the present, the opponent shouts, asking how long he's going to wait. Staring at the challenger, the young master watches him in complete silence. Then he asks what the warrior's name in front of him was again. Annoyed, Pyongho-gu shouts his name and asks if that was a taunt. As the fifth of the 7 disciples, he was one of the demon lords. He then remarks that his opponent seems quite confident to provoke him like that. Looking at the throne, he finally seems to understand something very important. From the look on his face, he realizes his father already knew about the poison. He understands that his father just wanted to see how he would fare on his own. With his knowledge, he could defeat him, but he decides not to reveal his strength just yet. Raising his fist, he prepares to make a declaration to everyone there. Shouting loudly, he declares he will fight Pyongho without using his chi. Completely shocked, the crowd and his opponent don't understand his decision. Immediately after, the crowd erupts in cheers, chanting Muguk's name. Meanwhile, Pyongho-gu is furious with the crowd's support for his rival. Pyongho-gu then shouts that he too will fight without using his chi. With his fist still raised, he faces the crowd before him. At this, some people in the audience complain that the fight will be boring. Holding the hilt of his sword, he warns that the blade has a will of its own. He slams the weapon on the ground, telling the young master to be careful. Feeling his new body, Muguk wonders if it will move as he wishes. Moving his weapon, the challenger yells for him to draw his sword now. Responding calmly, he says a weapon isn't necessary to defeat him. The audience then begins to laugh, taunting the big man with that response. Pyongho warns that he won't take his life just because he is Cheonma's son. Leaping to attack, he says he will gladly tear off one of his arms. Dodging to the side, Muguk escapes the massive blow from the giant sword. He then realizes his body is much faster than he expected. Taking advantage of the movement, he lands a kick that sends his rival flying up. Jumping right after, he positions himself in the air, high above his opponent. Moving quickly, he slides across the arena floor toward his opponent. He says this is how his heart used to pound in his youth. Furious, the challenger calls him a brat and grinds his teeth. Shouting in fury, he asks how he dares to laugh and attacks with his sword. Dodging the blow, he acrobatically leaps over his opponent. Still in the air, he lands a powerful elbow strike right in his rival's face. Unable to react, Pyongho just chokes from the force of the impact. The blow breaks his nose, sending blood gushing everywhere. Without giving him time to breathe, he follows up with a strong punch to the chest. The fist connects with force, splattering more blood all around. Grabbing him by the neck, he readies the next attack with a closed fist. Then, he unleashes a sequence of fast, brutal punches to the face. The barrage of blows continues relentlessly, hitting his opponent over and over. Already unconscious, the challenger's face is left completely bloodied and beaten. Finally, his body collapses to the ground, ending the fight. Stomping hard on his hand, Muguk stops him from reaching for the sword. Then he asks if that was the hand he used to deliver the vial. Completely shocked, the challenger can't believe what he's hearing. Without hesitation, Muguk stomps harder and breaks his opponent's arm. As his rival screams in pain, he just stares at him with a cold gaze. Seeing the brutal scene, the crowd reacts as Pyongho remains on the ground. Before his defeated opponent, he is cheered on by the watching crowd. Reflecting on the journey, he knows the cost was too high to fail. At that, Cheonma raises a hand to silence the entire crowd. Surprised, everyone in the venue stops shouting and immediately looks to the throne. From his throne, he reminds them he promised a wish and tells the victor to speak. Standing in the arena, the young warrior faces his father, preparing for his request. Thinking about what to ask for, he knows everyone expects a weapon or a technique. With a serious expression, the leader simply waits to hear the final decision. Determined to follow his instinct, he prepares to announce his wish. He then reveals that his wish is to go hunting with his father. Faced with the request, the great Cheonma stares at him in complete silence for a moment. Defeated, Pyongho-gu remains kneeling on the ground as the crowd watches. Surprised, the leader asks if he really wants to go on a hunt with him. Confirming the request, he says he heard about his past and wants to learn. With narrowed eyes, he stares at his son for a moment before deciding. At this, he rests his hand on the throne and prepares to give his answer. Standing up, he accepts the wish and tells him to be ready by dawn. As he turns to leave, his cape moves with the wind. Then, he walks out of the arena, leaving the other lords behind. From a distance, the young warrior watches his father walk away without a word. Then, one of the seated young men calls him a complete and useless fool. Continuing the taunt, he says it was a waste to use the wish like that. Turning around, he asks who he is, as Pyongho screams for revenge. With his return, he confirms that everyone's days of corruption are officially over. Later, in his room, he watches the sunset from the window. Looking at his reflection, he still can't believe how young he is now. Then he stares at the image of his older self in the small mirror. Thoughtfully, he wonders what the powerful Mugi might be doing at that moment. He knows the problem is that finding the villain is a difficult task. Appearing out of nowhere, he defeated all the alliances and the demonic cult. With his arms crossed, he thinks that looking for him could be risky. Clenching his fist, he decides his best chance is to get stronger. Standing in the middle of the room, he prepares for his next moves. Suddenly, a voice calls him, "Young Master," interrupting his thoughts. Coming from the door, A woman congratulates him on his incredible victory in the duel. Surprised, he turns and recognizes her, calling her by the name Anne. Smiling, she introduces herself as Anpei, his sworn personal bodyguard. He recalls that at the time, he didn't realize her build was from martial training. Her secret technique was the stone skin shell, which hardened the skin. Remembering the past, he recalls her throwing herself in front of Mugi's sword. Thanks to her sacrifice, he managed to escape that terrible confrontation alive. Confused by his gaze, she asks why he's staring at her like that. He then remembers that her voice was always very pleasant. Recalling the past, he admits he only saw her as a simple guard. He never truly valued her presence by his side. Standing face to face, the two stare at each other for a moment in silence. Then, he realizes her presence was greater than he had imagined. Not understanding why, she continues to stare at him with a confused expression. In a flashback, he recalls that Anne Lee was known as the Great Beauty, but he remembers that one day she appeared before him, completely changed. Smiling, she promised to protect him no matter what. He realizes that back then, he didn't notice the tears she shed alone. Regretfully, he wonders why he didn't comfort her when she changed. He then admits that he might have treated her coldly without realizing it. With a determined look, he makes a new decision about her future. Looking at her, he says he will also make a promise on this very day. He then vows to reverse the effect of the stone skin technique. Worried, she asks the master if he's really okay. Turning his face away, he remains silent for a brief moment before answering. He replies that he's fine, in fact, better than he's ever been. Still confused, she comments that he's acting very strange. He understands that because she's always close, she noticed the big change in him. Calling for her to come, he says he'll show her something even stranger. She asks where they're going, and he replies, to the kitchen. Arriving there at night, he already has a plan in mind. Once inside, he faces all the cooks lined up before him. Looking at one of them, he asks directly why he did it. Confused, the head cook says he has no idea what he's talking about. With a serious look, he prepares to be more specific with his question. He then asks why his food was poisoned before the great duel. Stammering, the cook denies everything and swears he didn't do it. At this, he asks if he went to bet the 3,000 coins again. Recalling the past, he explains that the cook was a gambling addict. On his knees, the cook begs for mercy, confessing his greed. With a cold gaze, he asks if Pyongho delivered the money personally. Frightened, the cook confirms that yes, he was the one who delivered the bag. Without hesitation, he draws his sword and strikes the traitor with a swift blow. Horrified, the other cooks scream as they witness the scene right in front of them. Looking at the body on the floor, he says a treacherous cook cannot be saved. At this, the head chef kneels and pleads, saying it was all his fault. He replies that the fault is not his, but the traitors who poisoned them. Without a word, he just listens to the head chef's argument. Next, he asks if something unjust in the sect is his father's fault. Scared, the head chef denies it, while Lee watches everything with her hands clasped. He then questions why the old man is trying to take all the blame. No longer caring, he says he wants chicken noodles for dinner. The head chef just closes his eyes in silence, processing everything that happened. As they leave, Lee comments that he ate the same dish yesterday. The two stare at each other for a moment, and she's confused by his gaze. With a slight smile, he replies that in his memory, it's been decades since he ate it. The next day, Cheonma is already waiting for him at the Heavenly Demon Palace. Seeing the preparations, he asks if his son is planning to never return. Answering the question, he says he only brought enough for a few days. Replying to his father, he says they might enjoy the hunt and stay longer. With a serious expression, he stares at him for a moment without showing any reaction. Saying he wouldn't count on it, he starts walking, and his son follows. After a long walk, they arrive in a remote, mountainous region. Once in the forest, the two continue walking along a narrow trail. Suddenly, the father praises him, saying he seems to have improved a lot. Surprised, he wonders if his father noticed his skills from his past life. Deciding to be honest, he realizes it would be better not to try to deceive him there. Confessing the truth, he reveals he's been hiding his strength for a while. With a slight smile, he compares himself to a tiger hiding its claws. The father just watches him in silence as he listens to his son's explanation. Turning, he asks what advantage there is for a tiger to hide its claws. With that response, he says that makes him a cat, not a tiger. Without wasting time, he asks how far his son has ascended with the sword. Being a secret technique, the Sword of the Heavenly Way was passed down through the bloodline. Considered one of the greatest arts, the technique is practiced by masters of the demonic path. With a confident smile, he reveals he has already achieved full mastery of the technique. Just then, a projectile suddenly grazes right past his face. Startled, he says he would have a hole in his face if he hadn't turned his head. Confirming the skill, the father says it seems he wasn't lying. He replies that it would be a shame to ruin the good looks he inherited from his father. At the comment, the father just stares at him in silence for a moment. Seeing the reaction, the young man wonders if maybe he pushed it too far. Acknowledging the achievement, the father says that reaching mastery at his age is commendable. Being praised, the young warrior looks aside with a surprised expression. After the small test, the two continue walking through the dense, dark forest. With a slight smile, he thanks his father for acknowledging his skill. Stopping in a clearing, they prepare to begin the real hunt. Kneeling on the ground, the father asks who taught him how to hunt. After a pause, he finally answers that it was his older brother. Surprised, the young man says he didn't know he had a brother. Revealing the past, he says that he took his brother's life in his youth. Saying nothing, the son just stares at him in silence after the revelation. Responding seriously, he says he's glad he did it. The father looks at him, surprised, not understanding his son's reaction to the story. He then explains that if he hadn't done it, he wouldn't be alive. With a distant look, the father just listens to what his son has to say. Without another word, he turns and continues walking down the trail. Thinking, the son understands that his father is not immune to the pain of loss. With a hand on his head, he recalls seeing no other way out at the time. He concludes that his father found no other way to win the succession. Clenching his fist, he warns that things might not be different with him. He says that if his father couldn't find a way, he won't either. Looking at his father, he questions if he shouldn't have a brother. He finishes by saying that his father knows how vile and cruel he is. With a serious expression, the father faces his son after hearing the accusation. At this, he stops walking and turns to his son on the forest trail. He then says it's easy to speak ill of someone who isn't there. Arriving in a mountainous region, they continue their hunt. Without hesitation, the two leap from a cliff with great speed and agility. Climbing the rock face, he looks at his father with a very serious expression. Remembering his past life, he says he doesn't understand the feelings of a parent. Stomping his foot firmly, he continues, saying it makes him even more curious about everything. Looking up, he wonders what exactly he means to his own father. Stopping at the top of the cliff, his father seems to have found something. Looking toward the forest, he asks what's just ahead. With a serious gaze, his father replies that their dinner is there. Ready to attack, he's asked how he can shoot something he can't see. His father then instructs him to close his eyes and sense his surroundings. Obeying the command, he closes his eyes and begins to concentrate intensely. Explaining the technique, the father says this is how you sense a presence. He then realizes the only presence he can feel is his father's. To continue, his father asks him to project a single stream of energy. His father continues the instruction, telling him to make the movement slowly. He explains to the young man that he should imagine his body as a spool of thread. Finishing the tip, he says to release the energy like a single thread. Suddenly, the young warrior feels a strange presence in the forest. He then confirms he can feel something, as the stream has found a target. At this, his father asks what he thinks he found with the technique. With the projected energy, he believes the target is a tree. Telling him to go slow, his father tells him to examine the area. Sweating a little, he continues to concentrate with his eyes closed. The stream of energy then begins to trace the target, revealing its shape. From the outline, he realizes it's an animal with large tusks. Opening his eyes, he's startled to see it's a wild boar. Confused, he says its elongated body indicates it's a boar. Without hesitation, his father confirms that it is indeed a large wild boar. Clenching his fist, he prepares to finally take down the prey in the forest. Praising himself, he says that not even his father managed this on the first try. Replying with pride, he says he is his son, and it's his duty to surpass him. With a surprised look, his father just listens to the comment without a word. Later, he asks how his son learned to clean the game like that. Pleased with the result, he's happy that his skill seemed natural. He says that the tiger skin his father wears was a gift from him. At this, his father asks if the desire for the hunt was a plan for the succession. Denying the accusation, he says he knows flattery has no effect on him. His father just stares at him, calling his statement quite bold. With a serious look, he asks the real reason for requesting the hunt. He replies that he had two reasons, the first being to learn how to get stronger. His father then asks what he'll do with this newfound strength. He explains that he's not that interested in becoming the next Cheonma. Looking at the stars, he says he would be happy just to be the heir. With his gaze fixed on the sky, he continues to explain his true desire. He thinks that he needs to learn and master the 9 paths of the infernal flames. With a focused gaze, he decides he needs to go beyond simple mastery. Remembering the past, he recalls that even his father was defeated by Mugi. Because of this, he understands he needs to achieve divine mastery to win. At this, his father asks what the second reason for the hunt was. With a smile, he prepares to finally reveal his true motive. He then says he just wanted to spend some time with his old man. Scolding his son, he warns that this kind of sentimentality could get him killed. Responding with confidence, he says being with his father isn't mediocre. Faced with this answer, his father just stares at him in silence for a moment. With a surprised look, He seems to be processing his son's words. Turning his face away, he averts his gaze, perhaps hiding his true reaction. The two fall silent, watching the fire for a brief moment. Recalling the past, he says he doesn't have good memories of his father. He then warns that this time, he won't be collecting bad memories with him. Seeing the dawn break, he comments that it's time for them to head back. His father says that, at the very least, he should bring a tiger back. Not understanding the suggestion, he stares at his father with a confused expression. Telling him to stop standing around, his father orders his son to follow him. With a determined look, he replies yes and follows his father immediately. Arriving in a bamboo forest, they continue their search for prey. His father then warns that the target is 1,000 feet away. He instructs his son to attune to the wind and let his energy flow. Reflecting, he realizes he never thought of letting his energy flow with the wind. With his father's command, he prepares to release his energy again. Explaining further, his father says the projection needs intention and speed. The energy then begins to move, following the invisible air currents. Concentrating, he says he can feel the wind and his chi moving. With difficulty, he wonders how he can combine the two distinct forces. The stream of energy and the wind begin to move in different directions. Suddenly, he realizes something important about his father's technique. He understands that the energy shouldn't ride the wind, but intertwine with it. With this realization, the energy merges perfectly with the wind. The stream of energy moves swiftly, weaving around the bamboo in the forest. He manages to guide the stream over a long distance with the new technique. The energy continues to advance, getting closer and closer to its target. Upon arrival, the stream outlines the animal, revealing a tiger's eye. Startled, he hears the animal's growl and backs away slightly. Turning to his father, he yells that there really is a tiger in the forest. With a serious expression, his father looks at him, asking what the problem is. He then advises him not to slack off on his energy projection training. Showing the drink, he says he has a secret weapon for the night. At the bonfire, the two sit down and start drinking together. Holding the container, his father eyes the drink with curiosity before taking a sip. After a sip, he praises it, saying it's an excellent wine. Pretending to be drunk, he says the drink is a bit strong for him. His father replies that no disciple of the demonic path complains about a drink. Arguing back, he says a poisoned heart is worse than liquid poison. Holding the container, he asks what kind of son would kill his own father. He thinks to himself that he's willing to kill him, as his own life is more precious. Getting straight to the point, he asks his father if he would be able to kill him. Taking another drink, his father says he shouldn't speak of such things so lightly. Looking at the wine, he says that perhaps the drink will give him the answer. At that, he takes a long gulp of the drink while staring at his father. With a serious gaze, his father just watches him in silence. As night falls, the palace grows silent under the starry sky. Inside the hall, Muguk meditates, completely focused on his energy training. With a deep breath, he finishes the concentration exercise. Opening his eyes, he reflects on the progress he's made in his power. He notes that by focusing on his training, he can now disperse his energy. This ability, he thinks, is like having an extra life against his enemies. At this rate, he'll be able to nullify any stealth attack technique used against him. Clenching his fist tightly, he displays his newfound determination. But soon, he remembers an important detail from his past. Even with so much power, his father was defeated by Mugi, and the palace fell. He then recalls the heavenly demon palace and its countless defenses. Recalling the defenses, he mentions the demon lords of the north and south. Guarding the east is the Immortal Fist and his Iron Fist clan. Meanwhile, sorcerers protect the west, and an enigmatic group guards the northeast. Finishing the description, in the southeast is the drunken tiger with his festive companions. Finally, he describes the guards of the southwest, the Jade Viper, and the Mad Monks. Remembering the past, he says he thought the enemy had broken through the defenses. He explains that one of the lords let Mugi in, but the traitor was never discovered. But it doesn't matter to him, as he considers all 8 of them traitors in death. None of them tried to avenge his father. They all simply chose complete silence. Knowing what the future holds, he knows the life and end of each one. Taking a step forward, he begins to move across the large training hall. He then walks steadily towards the exit, his sword at his waist. Affirming his conviction, he says he will use the lords as pawns for his goal. Pausing for a moment, he observes the hall's exit before continuing on his way. As he approaches, he hears a voice asking if the young master has returned from training. Outside, Pyongho-gu shouts at An Li, ordering her to fetch the master. She tries to apologize, but is interrupted by a voice asking what she's doing there. Seeing Muguk, and Lee calls him master, leaving the other man quite surprised. He then asks why she stood guard, since he had dismissed her during his training. Coming closer, a man questions Muguk's sudden dedication to training. Recognizing the newcomer, he identifies him as Po Yang, a disciple of the Blade Demon. He then comments that the only reason the other man is acting this way is because of his father. He explains that his father's announcement motivated everyone to try and take him down by any means. Turning to Po Yang, he asks directly what he really wants there. Without hesitation, the man accuses him of crippling Pyongho, his younger brother. With a mocking tone, he He asks if the other expects him to take care of his brother. He then says he didn't know they were close enough for that kind of joke. Shouting, the man demands a formal apology for ruining Pyongho. He then connects the situation to an important fact he already knew. The explanation is that the Blade Demon had not yet chosen his main disciple. That's why the man was trying to score points to secure the disciple position. Seeing the whole situation, he can't help but let out a slight smirk. He taunts him, saying it won't help, and the other angrily denies it all. But Muguk surprises him, saying that he actually wants him to apologize. Confused, the man asks why he should be the one to apologize now. Demanding an apology, he says it's for the rude words spoken to his bodyguard. At this, Pyongho-gu is shocked by the demand, unable to believe what he heard. Trying to calm the situation, she says it's okay, but he replies that it's not. Seeing his attitude, the bodyguard is left completely speechless. Maintaining his command, he tells Po-yang to kneel and beg for forgiveness. Defiantly, the man asks if he's supposed to kneel to that girl. With a serious look, Muguk warns him to watch his words. Po-yang shouts that he can kill him, but he will never kneel to her. Smiling, Muguk says that's what he wanted to hear, and that he will grant his wish. With that, he draws his sword, preparing for the fight to come. Seeing the blade, Po-yang and An Li react with total surprise and astonishment. Completely shocked, the man says Muguk has completely lost his mind. He then gives him a choice: kneel and apologize, or fight him. To top it off, he warns that his master won't approve if he backs down now. In response, he says they can all come after him for revenge. He doesn't care. He warns, however, that he will not tolerate disrespect toward his people. At this, the bodyguard watches him closely after hearing his words. One of Po Yang's men calls him a fool for risking his life. With a smile, he says, she's worth it, unlike them. Furious at the response, Po Yang raises his enormous sword to attack. His companions shout desperately, telling him not to do something so stupid. She tries to intervene to protect her master, but he stops her with his arm. Now the two warriors face each other in the courtyard, ready to fight. He says that since Muguk is the commander's son, he can't take his life. Warning that he'll take his arm instead, he spins and attacks with full force. Everyone watches in shock as Muguk waits for the blow without moving. The attack closes in, but he remains still, calmly watching the blade. With a swift motion, the giant sword swings down directly at him, but he stops the giant blade with his own sword, right near his neck. Completely shocked, the companions and the bodyguard react to the scene they just witnessed. He then warns that his rival's reckless tongue has sealed his fate. Slashing his shoulder, Muguk says that he insulted a member of his group. He then adds, recalling that the man refused to apologize in the end. After the attack, he walks away, leaving the three men fallen in the courtyard. As a result of the blow, Po Yang's shoulder bleeds heavily onto the ground. With a serious expression, he stands still after finishing the swift combat. Running in despair, the companions scream as they see their sect brother lying on the ground. One of them then threatens Muguk, yelling that he will pay dearly for this. Seeing their reaction, he says the two seem to share their friend's foolishness. He then orders them to deliver the message without changing a word, or he will find them. Carrying the wounded man, they retreat from the scene under Muguk's gaze. Approaching him, An Li asks why he did all that. She continues, questioning what he was thinking, saying it wasn't worth it. Observing her reaction, he notes that she seems more worried about him than herself. He explains that he didn't do it for her, and she warns him about the Blade Demon. Saying her fear is justified, he mentions the power of the Demon Lords. He recalls that he crippled one of his disciples and has just defeated another. Still, he believes the Lord won't react, so as not to appear weak, but she insists, saying his attitude could hurt the Lord's pride. Ending the conversation, he says the Lord doesn't waste time on petty pride. Approaching her, he tells Anne not to worry about anything at all. She stares at him, surprised by his attitude and his words. After that, the two turn and start walking through the courtyard together. He then comments that eliminating Po will actually give him a great advantage. By defeating them both, he explains, all eyes will now be on him. Stopping for a moment, she thanks him for everything he did today. With a big smile, she confesses she was very happy when he defended her. Hearing her thanks, he just watches her with a slight smile on his face. He then tells her to remember this day for the rest of her life. Keeping his smile, he continues to look ahead as they walk through the courtyard. He then remembers the past, hoping she will always keep smiling. The scene changes. Night falls under a sky with a large full moon. Now in a garden, he walks alone toward a large rock. Sitting there, he reflects that he felt defeated after his family's fall. He concludes by saying that despair almost stopped him from pursuing his goals. He then wonders what would have become of him if he hadn't returned to the past. Suddenly, he senses a powerful presence and turns his eyes, quite startled. Seeing a reflection, he perceives a murderous intent coming directly at him. Turning to the side, he prepares to face the threat that has emerged. The presence fully manifests, revealing an imposing figure right behind him. The shadowy figure of an old warrior stares at him with great intensity. Seeing who it is, he braces himself for what might happen next. Before him stood none other than the fearsome Blade Demon himself. Not expecting the visit, He wonders if he could even dodge a blow. Despite his knowledge, he admits the Lord's mastery is superior. Feeling the pressure from the blade, he turns to face the man head-on, but instead of attacking, the Lord just sits down next to him on the rock. The blade demon then stares at him in silence for a brief moment. Then he breaks into a huge smile, showing the boy all his teeth. Poking him with the sword, the Lord asks why he did all that. With a nervous smile, he replies that the other guy was crossing the line. Hearing the answer, the Lord simply reacts with a single, simple question. He then asks what kind of fool would pick a fight with Cheonma's son. Closing his eyes for a second, he seems to think over the whole situation. Suddenly, he slams the sword down right next to Muguk's foot. He then threatens to take his head to his father to see what he thinks. Unfazed, he says he doubts his father would be happy about that. Amused, the Lord smiles at the bold answer he just heard. Pulling the blade away, he seems to have decided what to do next. Standing up, he drags the sword across the rock, making a loud noise. Continuing the motion, he scratches the rock with the blade, even creating sparks. Not understanding at all, Muguk just watches the Lord's action, very confused. Explaining the drawing, he says the smaller line represents Muguk's favor. Muguk remains silent, just listening to the Lord's explanation of the drawing. After explaining everything, he observes the boy, who now lowers his gaze. Making a new line on the rock, he corrects the proportion set by the Lord. Claiming to be his son, he proposes a 7-to-3 ratio. Seeing the boy's audacity, the Lord breaks into a very satisfied smile. He then says there's only one way to test this crazy theory. Without backing down, he replies that the Lord underestimates his father's affection. Gripping the sword more firmly, the Lord agrees to his proposal. Then he says they will test it, making the situation much more tense. Seeing the threat, Muguk says that maybe this test isn't necessary. After the response, the Lord remains silent for a brief moment. Smiling, he comments that Muguk isn't as dense as his former disciple. He remains standing there, just observing the reaction of the fearsome veteran warrior. Getting up, he says that if his disciple had been like him, he would still be alive. Calling his name, the Lord turns to give one last important warning. He warns that misfortune has followed him, so it would be better if they didn't meet too often. With a faint smile, he replies that he will remember that warning well. After the Lord leaves, he notices something and suddenly turns his head. He reacts with shock, as the Lord has simply vanished from before him. He then looks up, seeing the Lord leap and disappear into the darkness. Alone again, he remains standing next to the large rock. With a pained expression, he suddenly brings a hand to his waist. He then clutches the spot, bending over slightly from the injury. Lifting his clothes, he reveals the bruises left by the sword's pokes. Remembering the pokes, he calls him a cunning old man for that move. He then comments that the Lord doesn't seem to be a wild or reckless man. Standing alone, he says the Lord always calculates all his moves. The repeated threat, according to him, meant the Lord was actually considering it. He continues, saying the Lord came to see him because of the duel, and now he needed to test him to see if he was a worthy successor. Unleashing his energy, he prepares for what's to come. Back in the hall, he continues to meditate, further honing his skills. His energy flows powerfully, a testament to his constant training. Sensing a presence, he opens his eyes, realizing he's no longer alone. Meanwhile, a mysterious figure lands on the roof, approaching his location. Leaping across the rooftops, the person reveals themselves, watching the courtyard from above. He then looks up, trying to identify the newcomer. Now outside, he faces the figure on the opposite roof. Recognizing the person, he asks in surprise if it's really his father. His father then says he heard about him defeating one of the disciples. Hearing the accusation, he stares at his father in silence, waiting for him to continue. He confirms it, saying the man deserved his fate, but his father says that Cheonpa came to him because of it, leaving him surprised. Completing the story, he reveals the request was to punish his own son. Confirming the story, his father says he was also caught completely by surprise. He understands the Lord is testing his relationship with his father. His father then says the Lord wants to know if he sees him as an heir. Decided, his father says he will do exactly as requested. Muguk says he did nothing to deserve this, but his father says it's simple. Seeing his father's determination, he is left completely speechless. His father then recalls a question he asked in the forest. He confirms asking which lord was the most trustworthy. Remembering the scene, he had asked which of the 8 his father trusted most. He remembers his father didn't give him a straight answer. Looking at his son, his father reveals he trusts none of the lords. He then reveals he trusts no one, which completely surprises Muguk. Telling him to cut the chatter, he demands to know what his son really thinks. After the command, the two stare at each other in silence for a long time. Lowering his head, he finally begins to say what he truly thinks. He states that at some point they all lost the right path. Listening intently, his father processes his son's declaration about the path. He then confirms that yes, they have indeed lost the path they were following. Challenging his son, his father asks him to explain this so-called right path. Responding firmly, he says their path is to hunt evil. At this, his father questions if that is truly the cult's belief. He confirms, and his father then asks who their true enemy is. Revealing the truth, he says their mortal enemy is evil itself. He continues, describing an evil so cowardly that even demons would be disgusted. Explaining further, he says that others are like lambs against hungry wolves. Without a word, his father just listens to the speech with great attention. He then questions how they can fight evil by clinging to compassion, stating with conviction, he says only those willing to get their hands dirty can win. Then he shouts that when the great evil finally kneels before them, finishing his speech, he says only then will the demon's path be forged. Having heard everything, his father stares at him with a very thoughtful look. Shouting, he says they must punish themselves more severely to survive. His father stares at him, remaining silent after hearing his words. Watching his father, he realizes he has never heard such thoughts in his life. He knows his father has never had or heard these ideas before. He then explains that these are not the cult's ideas, but his own. At this, his father asks if he has any more arrogant ideas to share. Seeing his father's reaction, he just watches in silence, not responding. Answering the question, he says he has nothing more for today. His father then says he understands why Cheonpa asked to have him punished. Continuing his explanation, he says the Lord must have sensed something in him. Suggesting a reason, he says the Lord noticed his potential as a successor, but his father raises another possibility, that he is a threat. After the response, his father falls silent, just staring at the horizon. Calling his son, he invites him to go somewhere with him. Surprised, Muguk asks where they're going so late at night. They arrive at a place with a strange inscription at the cave entrance. Stopping before the door, he and his father observe the cave's entrance. He recognizes the place as the Halls of Ascension, a testing ground. According to him, the success rate is 50%, making it very dangerous. He remembers his brother never dared to go there because it was so dangerous, but he also knows it's a necessary test to become a Cheonma. He asks his father if he's really expected to go in there. Surprised, he asks how long it took his father to get out. His father answers bluntly, saying it only took him 2 months. Shocked, he recalls that it took his father 2 months, even though he's a genius. His father then reveals the average time to get out is 3 years. He asks if his father wants him to go in unprepared, as a punishment. Seeing his father's silence, he just stares at him, waiting for an answer. In disbelief, he asks if his father would really send him to his death. He continues, questioning if his father expects him to emerge stronger. Seeing his reaction, his father gives a slight smile, revealing his true intentions. Accepting the challenge, he says he will beat his father's time. With a smile, his father advises him to try not to die first. Entering the hall, he starts walking down the long, mysterious corridor. He then wonders what makes this place so special and dangerous. Continuing on, he carefully observes his surroundings. Looking down the endless hallway, he notices the many cells lining each side. He stops in front of a large stone pillar with inscriptions. Reading the rules, he discovers he can't use energy and has 10 days. After reading, he turns his head, noticing something different. Seeing the jars, he understands the pills are for the duration of the tests. Determined to begin, he steps into the circle on the floor to start. As soon as he steps in, a metallic sound echoes throughout the corridor. Suddenly, wooden mannequins emerge from the cells and advance toward him. In an instant, a true army of mannequins forms before him. Analyzing the targets, he notices he needs to cut the areas marked in red. The fight begins. He dodges and attacks the mannequins with his sharp sword. With a focused gaze, he keeps fighting, concentrating on his every move. Attacking relentlessly, he slices through the mannequins with impressive and precise speed. With a final blow, he leaps and cuts down the last mannequin in front of him. The pieces of the mannequins fall and scatter across the corridor floor. He then remarks that it was easier than he initially thought. Suddenly, the destroyed mannequins begin to move and reassemble. Realizing the danger, he says he can't let them rebuild. Moving quickly, he tries to stop one of the mannequins from getting up, but even as he cuts them, the mannequins keep reassembling relentlessly. Leaping back, he distances himself to think of a new strategy. Quickly, the pieces of the mannequins begin to fit back into place. One by one, the mannequins reassemble, standing up, ready to attack. The floor trembles as the mannequins now surround him, ready for a fight. Seeing there's only one left, he readies himself for the round's final attack. Stomping hard, he uses the momentum to leap toward the mannequin. Flying through the air, he charges forward, sword in hand, for the final blow. With one last strike, he destroys the mannequin's core, ending the fight. Relieved, he says he almost got stuck for 10 days for letting his guard down. He admits that before his regression, passing the test like that would have been impossible. Having won, he turns and walks toward the door to the next challenge. Getting closer, he notices various writings on the walls of the narrow hallway. Reading the messages, he sees that others took many attempts to pass. He understands they are messages from everyone who came before him. Noticing a detail, he sees that the final handwriting looks very familiar. Laughing, he recognizes his father's handwriting and the insult to the others. He finds it funny that his father would call their ancestors idiots like that. After reading the messages, he prepares for the next challenge. Entering the new room, he sees an arsenal of weapons displayed on the walls. Looking around, he carefully observes each of the available weapons. He remarks that all kinds of weapons are in this special chamber. With a fixed gaze, he analyzes the arsenal, thinking about what comes next. Seeing the weapons, he assumes the next test has something to do with them. Reading the rules, he learns he must cut a stone in 2 hours with the swords. Stepping into the circle, he prepares for the challenge ahead. Before him, a metal sphere appears on a stone pedestal. Looking at the sphere, he remains silent, analyzing the challenge before him. He finds it strange to have 2 hours to cut the iron ball with energy. Suspicious, he believes there must be something more to such a simple test. Grabbing a sword, he wields it, preparing for the first strike. He strikes the sphere, but the blade shatters, proving the metal is special. With the broken sword, he confirms his suspicions and decides on a new strategy. Holding another sword, he says he'll use his power to pass quickly. Channeling his energy, he prepares to cut the sphere in one blow. With focused eyes, he concentrates all his power into the sword's blade. Stopping his strike, he realizes the test would be too easy this way. He then steps away from the pedestal, thinking he needs to rethink his strategy. He then wonders what the others did to pass this test. Looking at the messages, he reads that one person cut it with energy on the first try. Searching for his father's words, he finds the answer to his question. Reading the message, he understands the advice his father left behind. He finds it strange that his father added the extra line about losing his cool. Rereading the rule, he realizes he can use energy, but he isn't required to. With this discovery, he understands the test is about cutting it without energy. Grabbing a sword, he begins to strike the sphere with all his might. Now using a hammer, he keeps trying to break the metal sphere. Even with the hammer, the metal sphere remains intact, without a scratch. Panting, he wonders how to cut the sphere without energy as time runs out. In a moment of desperation, he considers just using his power. Gritting his teeth, he fights the temptation to use energy to win. Exhausted, he lets out a long sigh, unsure of what to do next. But he remembers that his father somehow managed it without using energy. Suddenly, he has an idea of how his father might have passed. Releasing his energy, he focuses on trying a new approach. He sends his energy toward the sphere to inspect it. His energy envelops the entire sphere, allowing him to feel every detail. Surprised, he notices something he couldn't see with the naked eye. He says he can feel a thin groove running along the entire surface. With the sword in hand, he uses his energy to guide the blade. He realizes the line connects, forming a perfect circle on the sphere. Using the groove as a guide, he spins his body and cuts the sphere. With a precise strike, the metal sphere finally splits in two. With a victorious shout, he celebrates passing the test. But as he looks, he notices something strange inside the broken sphere. Confused, he moves closer to see what the mysterious object is. Shocked, he recognizes the object as a demon essence pill. Holding the pill, he explains that it boosts the user's energy. He realizes that if he had used his energy, the heat would have destroyed the pill. With a smile, he understands it was a reward for those who didn't use their energy. Remembering the advice, he thanks his father and swallows the pill in one go. Sitting on the floor, he begins to meditate to absorb the pill's power. Closing his eyes, he focuses completely on absorbing the new energy. Through meditation, a great wave of power begins to flow from his body. His energy expands throughout the room, showing his new level. Finishing the process, he takes a deep breath, feeling the power he has just gained. Standing up, he feels the new strength coursing through his entire body. Clenching his fist, he tests the energy now flowing within him. He says he can now feel a power that is made up for his greatest weakness. Reading the pillar, the next rule says to distinguish between life and death. Not understanding, he wonders what kind of crazy test this could be. Before him, a stone board rises from the floor, revealing the challenge. Looking at the board, he finally understands what needs to be done. He realizes the challenge is to separate the medicinal herbs from the poisonous ones. Analyzing the board, he is certain that this is the test's objective. Remembering the past, he recalls when he used to search for materials for Ryongja. He says that since he can identify herbs, the test will be very easy. Reaching out, he prepares to choose the correct herb on the board. Picking up the plant, he states that it's the only one that isn't poisonous. After his choice, the board descends back into the floor. Suddenly, the board rises again, revealing a new set of herbs. Seeing the new round, he understands he needs to get it right twice in a row. Picking up the new herb, he analyzes it carefully before confirming his choice. After picking the second herb, the board descends back into the floor again. Waiting a moment, he realizes the board hasn't come back up. Just then, he hears a noise, turning his gaze toward the sound. Seeing the door open, he turns and walks toward the next stage. Arriving in the new hallway, he reads the messages left by the other warriors. He realizes his father memorized every single poisonous herb, one by one. Reading the last rule, he discovers the final test is one of survival. Standing before the pillar, he reflects on the test where failure means death. Seeing the messages, he reads that others were terrified by the final test. He reads another message from his father, which says to never stop moving. Stepping into the circle, he says his father left another clue for the test. He feels the hint is advice for the life that awaits him. As he enters the circle, The scenery around him begins to transform completely. Looking around, he sees the environment change, becoming a desert. Suddenly, he finds himself in a vast desert, alone and disoriented. Observing his surroundings, he realizes that the wind and everything there is real. Bending down, he touches the sand, confirming the sensation is very real. Picking up the sand, he's impressed by the formation technique of the place. With focused eyes, he prepares for the challenge ahead. Suddenly, a horde of enemies appears out of nowhere, completely surrounding him. Seeing the enemies, he realizes they are all just phantoms. Even though they're phantoms, he notes they all seem extremely real and dangerous. Standing in their midst, he can even feel their murderous intent. With a smile, he realizes the great opportunity he's just found. He says he's just hit the jackpot with this test. Wielding his sword, he prepares for the battle about to begin. With sword in hand, he advances to face the horde of enemies. The phantoms attack, and he defends himself, blocking the blow with his sword. Surrounded, he watches the enemy's every move, waiting for the right moment. Seeing an opening, he prepares to counterattack the phantoms. With a punch, he lands a solid hit on one of the enemies, creating an opening. Seizing the opportunity, he attacks another phantom, plunging his sword into its chest. He continues to fight, dodging and attacking with precision and great speed. Leaping into the air, he spins his body, cutting down several enemies at once. He says that since the opponents aren't human, he can fight without holding back. Using his energy, he prepares for a powerful and devastating attack. With a blast of energy, he cuts down all the enemies at once. He realizes that thanks to the pill, he can use his energy more easily. Suddenly, a new wave of enemies with different weapons appears in the desert. Seeing the new threat, he readies himself for another round of combat. Surrounded again, he faces the horde of enemies ready to fight. With a focused gaze, he analyzes the new opponents who seem stronger. The enemies advance, leaping at him with their weapons drawn. Taking a deep breath, he concentrates to unleash all his power at once. Releasing his energy, he creates a protective barrier, repelling the enemies. The energy expands, forming a beam of light that cuts through the air. Struck by the energy, the phantoms begin to be electrocuted and disintegrate. One by one, the enemies are destroyed by the energy he released. Seeing the destruction, he continues to channel his power to finish them all off. Surrounded by enemies, he unleashes his energy, cutting them all down at once. After the attack, the enemies are completely destroyed, their pieces flying far away. With the battle over, he stands tall, surrounded by the remains of his enemies. Lowering his sword, he observes the result of his last great assault. With a serious expression, he gazes at the now silent battlefield. Watching the enemies turn to dust, he wonders if the test is over. Standing alone, he remarks that it would be a disappointment if this was all there was. Just then, he senses a new presence, turning his head in its direction. With a slight smile, he faces the new threat that is emerging. Then a new horde appears, and he notices they seem much stronger. On the defensive, he blocks an enemy's attack with the side of his sword. Just then, he glances over, noticing a new threat coming his way. With his arm, he manages to deflect a spear thrown at him. Even out of breath, he smirks, getting ready to continue the long battle. He then realizes the enemies get stronger with each new wave. Remembering the advice, he says he now understands what his father meant. Moving non-stop, he dodges and attacks the enemies with quick strikes. He reflects that this is his first real battle since returning to the past. In this fight, he feels his past knowledge finally manifesting. Finishing the thought, he feels everything coming together perfectly in his new body. Leaping between enemies, he attacks them with his energy and his sword. Suddenly, several weapons are hurled in his direction at once. With his sword, he manages to deflect all the weapons that were thrown. Focused, he braces for the next move, not losing his concentration. Challenging them all, he yells for them to come at him with everything they've got. Moving faster, he cuts down the enemies, striving to become even stronger. Continuing the fight, he thrusts his sword at another one of the enemies. After a powerful blow, the last giant enemy is finally defeated by him. His energy strike splits the creature right down the middle, giving it no chance to defend. With its defeat, the giant enemy's hand falls heavily onto the desert floor. Panting, he holds his sword, catching his breath after the long battle. Watching the enemies turn to dust, he wonders if the test is finally over. With his body exhausted, he wonders if the battle has finally come to an end. Just then, a door opens, with a message congratulating him for passing the tests. With a smile, he realizes he passed in one day what took his father months. Thinking about the future, he knows this news will cause a huge problem in the cult. According to him, this speed will raise suspicion rather than praise. Reflecting on the situation, he stares into space, thinking about what he'll do next. Decided, he says he'll train more to absorb everything he's learned. 100 days later, Cheonma is sitting on his throne, awaiting news. Returning, he says he did his best, but couldn't break the record. His father asks if he cut the iron ball correctly, and he confirms. Hearing the answer, his father stares at him with a serious, thoughtful expression. After a moment, a faint smile forms on the great leader's face. Surprised, he thinks he saw his father smile, but he isn't sure. Looking at his father, he wonders wonders if he was just imagining things. He then says that Muguk is smarter than he previously thought. Closing his eyes, he seems pleased with the results of his son's training. He then reflects that he used to think his father enjoyed watching his children fight, but he understands that his father endures the loss to secure the future. Suddenly, a voice praises him for passing the tests in 100 days. Seeing the newcomer, he recognizes him as one of his father's trusted men. He identifies him as Chief Strategist Myung-sama, a powerful figure. Bowing, he greets the strategist, saying it's been a while since he last saw him. Seeing the young man, the strategist eyes him with a serious, analytical gaze. Approaching, the strategist says he needs to discuss a matter of the cult with him. Thoughtfully, he understands the strategist's request is actually an order from his father. The man reveals they received an anonymous letter about corruption in the demonic guard. Hearing the accusation, he remains silent, processing the new and serious information. He remembers that the guard is led by the Blade Demon's brother. The strategist explains that the previous investigator was killed during the last mission. Asking about the case, he finds out the killer also took their own life. After hearing everything, he faces the strategist, waiting for the next steps. Without beating around the bush, the man asks him to take over as the new investigator on the case. He knows the task is risky, as the culprits will try to cover everything up. Accepting the mission, he says the strategist is sending him to his grave. Looking back, he realizes the final decision isn't up to the strategist. Turning to the throne, he understands this is just another one of the tests. Just then, his father recalls that he said they needed to punish and correct themselves. Replying to his father, he says that will only happen after he becomes the leader. Taunting his son, his father asks if he's afraid to accept. With a sigh, he says that at this rate, he has no choice but to accept. Accepting the mission, he promises he'll solve the problem without hesitation. After the response, father and son stare at each other in silence for a moment. With a confident smile, he says he'll put on a good show for his father. He then invites his father for a drink since it might be the last time. But his father gets up and leaves without responding to the invitation. Seeing his father's reaction, he stands still, watching him walk away. He then comments that, deep down, his father is a very sensitive person. But the strategist says it doesn't seem that way, leaving Muguk a bit embarrassed. The scene changes as day breaks, illuminating the courtyard of the Grand Palace. A young man introduces himself as Daeryong Seo, an investigator from the Hwangchon office. Muguk just stares at him in silence, waiting for him to finish his introduction. He then asks why the young man is there, since he asked for the best one. Awkwardly, the young man replies that he must be the best-looking one then. With his arms crossed, he stares at the new investigator with a serious expression. Without wasting time, he says it's time to get to work. The investigator then asks if they're leaving now, and he confirms. Lowering his gaze, the investigator falls silent for a brief moment. As he starts walking, he asks what kind of man the guard commander is. Explaining the situation, he says the commander has led the guard for 8 years. He then comments that the commander seems to be very good at his job. Suddenly, he stops walking, interrupting their conversation. Seeing the sudden stop, the investigator asks what happened. Pointing out the truth, he says the investigator doesn't seem committed to this mission. Denying the accusation, the young man says he intends to do whatever it takes. Questioning his discouraged attitude, he hears the investigator say that nothing will change. After hearing the explanation, he remains silent, just observing the young man. With a worried expression, the investigator remains silent, looking down. Closing his eyes for a moment, he remains silent before the young man. Asking if he's afraid, Muguk hears the investigator say no. With a smirk, he recalls that the last investigator was killed in cold blood. The investigator then reveals that man was his direct senior at work. He continues, explaining to Muguk that the man was his great mentor. After hearing the story, he falls silent for a moment. Keeping his gaze lowered, the investigator remains silent after his revelation. Arriving at the palace, a guard asks where they're from, blocking their path. The investigator introduces himself and says he has business with the commander, telling him to step aside. Watching the scene, Muguk is impressed by the young man's sudden courage, but the guard is skeptical, saying he doesn't look special and needs permission. Just then, the investigator pulls an important document from inside his book. He shows the authorization, proving he has permission to enter the palace. The guard says he needs to report it, but the investigator says it's not necessary. Despite the order, the guard insists they can't pass without permission. Ignoring the order, he says it doesn't matter who they are in there. Surprised, the investigator can't believe the guard's audacity in ignoring the order. The guard continues, saying that without his title, he's nothing special. At that moment, Muguk steps forward and asks them both a direct question. Grabbing the guard, he asks if they know who he really is. Without hesitation, the guard replies that, yes, of course he knows who he is. With a smirk, he says the situation has just gotten much more interesting. He then asks if the guards really have the nerve to face him there. With a swift blow, he strikes both guards, knocking them aside. Shocked, the guards are left on the ground, unable to get up. The investigator stands frozen, just watching the two fallen men. Seeing the young man standing there, he asks if he's going to lead the way or not. Inside the palace, several armed men ready for a fight appear. Holding the authorization, the investigator shouts that they are obstructing an official investigation. But the men don't flinch, they just keep staring at the two in silence. silence. Suddenly, a man asks who is causing trouble in his territory. Introducing himself, the investigator demands the man identify himself as well. The man introduces himself as Dango, captain of the 1st Division. Whispering, Muguk warns that he's one of the guard's most ruthless captains. Seeing the young man's silence, the captain asks if he's lost his tongue. Gathering his courage, the investigator warns him to watch his tone, but the captain challenges him, and the investigator threatens to arrest them all for obstruction. Mocking the threat, the captain asks if he's really going to be arrested. Laughing out loud, he continues to mock the situation, enjoying the scene. Watching the reaction, Muguk lets out a slight laugh at the captain's audacity. He says he almost wet himself in fear, but invites the young man to try. Not knowing what to do, the investigator just stares at the situation, speechless. Stepping closer, Muguk greets the captain, saying it's good to see him again. With a handshake, he recalls that the last time was at the banquet. Suddenly, he squeezes the captain's hand hard, crushing his fingers. Feeling the pain, the captain bares his teeth, furious at his action. Asking to be let through, he threatens the captain, telling him not to test him there. Angrily, the captain says that titles don't make him immune to a stabbing. With a smile, he says he's curious to see if he can manage. The captain then says they'll see who hits the ground first. Thanking him for his cooperation, Muguk turns and goes on his way without hesitation. Going up the stairs, the investigator says he's never met that brute before. When he asks how, he hears Muguk say he gave his hand a little adjustment. Shocked, the investigator can hardly believe what he's hearing about the captain. Climbing the stairs, the investigator says the office is on the 7th floor. Arriving on the floor, a guard tells them they can't pass without an appointment. With a sigh, he wonders if people ever get tired of the same little act. He tells the guard to get out of the way, but the man says it's not possible. Showing the authorization, he hands it to the guard, who examines it. Explaining the situation, he says that to deny the order is to deny his own father. Seeing the authorization, the guard backs away, unsure of what to do next. He then asks if the guard is daring to challenge the leader's authority. Under pressure, the guards break into a cold sweat, unable to answer him. Seeing their reaction, he orders them to escort him to the commander's room. Sitting on his throne, a man receives them, welcoming them to his chambers. With a smile, he says his men were a bit overzealous. Seeing the man, Muguk recognizes him as Cheonyanggu, the commander of the guard. Analyzing the commander, he feels a strong concentration of energy coming from him. Looking over at the investigator, the commander realizes Muguk's presence is quite strong. With a slight smile, he prepares to speak with the commander of the guard. He says that, judging by his men, it seems they have too much free time. With a smile, the commander says that ignorance breeds courage in people. Refuting the idea, he says that smart people are just better at planning things. The commander then agrees, saying he must be getting old and out of touch. Seeing the reaction, he realizes the commander is playing along with his provocations. The commander asks why he's in charge, and he replies that it's a punishment. Surprised, the commander asks why his father would punish him. With a smile, he says he made a small mistake during the last hunt. The commander laughs out loud, amused by the story he just heard. Muguk realizes he was trying to figure out the reason for his presence. Curious, the commander asks why the investigation was reopened, but he confirms that a new anonymous tip came in. Shocked, the investigator can't believe he just revealed classified information. The commander says that leading an army like the Guard is quite exhausting. With a smile, he asks the commander to be patient with him, but the commander says Muguk has wronged him, and he isn't the forgiving type. He then points out that everyone knows the Blade Demon supports his brother. The commander agrees, but says he has always considered him the rightful heir to power. Laughing, he says the commander's words are a great comfort on his mission. With a smile, the commander promises his men will arrange accommodations for them. Before he leaves, the commander warns him to be careful during the investigation. Looking back, he sees the commander on his throne, watching him intently. He then asks if the commander is afraid he'll die like the last one. With a smile, the commander denies it, saying his father wouldn't have sent him. He then promises to keep an eye on him whenever he can. Thanking him for his hospitality, he says his goodbyes and starts to leave the room. After he leaves, the commander's expression changes, revealing his true face. Once outside, he and the investigator continue on their way through the palace. With a smirk, he says his father's intention was for one of them to die. Changing scenes, the strategist says the matter cannot be taken lightly. He continues, saying he should have gone himself instead of sending his son. At this, the father reveals that his son said they had strayed from the path. Surprised, the strategist asks if that's why he sent him there. Looking at the blade, he continues to watch the leader's reaction. He then says that if his son is going to talk the talk, he needs to be ready to walk the walk. Running his hand along the sword, he finishes by saying that his son needs to prove it. After hearing everything, the strategist remains silent, just watching the leader. Outside, a dead crow is hung up, causing a huge commotion. The guards complain, saying that hanging a dead crow is absurd. Arriving on the scene, they hear the guards complaining about the investigator's attitude. He notices that the most irritated are the men from the 1st Guard Division. Confronted, he and the investigator face the men, who shout at them. Suddenly, a man approaches with a very unfriendly expression on his face. With a serious look, he asks the man who he is and what he wants. Shouting, the man introduces himself as Ho Jiang, the captain of the 3rd Division. Whispering, the investigator says he's the most skilled among the captains. Approaching the man, he asks what made him so angry today. Pointing to the crow, the captain asks why he hung that thing up there. With a smile, he replies that someone from the guard left it on his bed. He then suggests that instead of complaining, he should punish the one responsible. After the response, the two stare at each other in silence for a long time. Decisively, he says he will start the investigation with the 3rd Division then. Confused, the captain asks what he intends to start right now. With a smile, he replies that he's obviously going to start the investigation. Not understanding, the captain questions the reason for starting so suddenly. He then orders the 3rd Division to hand over all its records. Continuing the order, he demands the stop and search logs and the ledger. Furious, the captain yells that he can't do that, even with his authority. The two then face off, with the tension between them growing ever stronger. Stepping forward, the captain stomps hard on the ground, ready for a fight. Unfazed, he warns that obstructing the investigation is the same as treason. His men hold the captain back, telling him to calm down and not attack. He then says he'll start the interrogation with the captain himself, right here and now. With no other option, the captain agrees, telling him to just get it over with. The scene changes. The day passes as the investigation continues in the room. Inside the room, he and the investigator question the captain about the case. During the interrogation, the two face each other, with tension thick in the air. Getting straight to the point, he asks how long the captain will keep pretending. Confused, the captain asks what he's talking about, not understanding the accusation. Without beating around the bush, he reveals that the captain was the one who sent the anonymous tip. Shocked, the investigator can't believe Captain Jiang sent the tip. He then wonders how the young master discovered this secret information. Suspiciously, the captain asks what makes him think he was the one who sent it. Seeing his reaction, he just watches in silence, waiting for the captain's response. Unable to deny it, the captain just stares at him with a serious expression. Clenching his fists, the captain asks, surprised, how he managed to find out. He explains that yesterday's challenge was to avoid suspicion from the commander. He also noticed that the warriors of the 3rd Division were the most disciplined. Continuing his explanation, he says that the loyalty of his men says a lot about him. After hearing everything, the captain remains silent, processing the words, but he reveals that wasn't how he discovered the truth about everything. He remembers that the investigator's information made him recall his past. He remembers that in his past, the strongest captain was killed. The captain explains that he didn't know if the letter would reach the right destination. With a serious look, he asks how the captain felt about his arrival. Being honest, the captain admits he thought they were completely screwed. With a smile, he asks if sincerity is a new trend among the youth. The investigator points out that he's younger than both of them. Wanting to know more, he asks what exactly has been happening in the guard. Unable to hide it any longer, the captain faces him, ready to reveal the truth. He reveals that the commander is using the guard for personal gain. Shocked, the investigator can't believe the serious accusation he just heard. He realizes the situation is more serious than simple bribery from clans. Confused, the investigator asks how this could be happening to them. The captain says that most of the guard is involved, including the 1st Division. Not understanding, he asks how the young master could know all this. He explains that the 1st Division was the first to block their path. Wanting to know more, he asks how the captain discovered the corruption in the guard. Lowering his head, the captain prepares to reveal the truth about the case. He reveals that the man accused of killing the investigator was a friend of his. Curious, he asks how close the two of them were. With a pained expression, the captain purses his lips, remembering his friend. He explains that they took the exams together and were like a close-knit family. With a serious look, he asks who the captain thinks killed him. Without hesitation, he says he suspects the commander gave the direct order. He then understands that the scandal involves the commander and the 1st Division. Furthermore, he realizes that his father and the strategist sent him knowing this. He continues, saying they wanted to see if he could handle the situation. Commenting on the story, he says the captain seems to be a good friend. But the captain denies it, saying if he were, he would have acted when they killed him. After hearing everything, he and the investigator remain silent in the room. Thanking him for his honesty, he praises Captain Jiang for his great bravery. Surprised, the captain is left speechless by the thanks he just received. With tears in his eyes, he cries upon hearing Muguk's words about him. Watching the scene, the investigator and Muguk remain silent in the room. Seeing the two of them, he says he feels a sense of hope to put everyone on the right path. He continues to watch the captain crying and the investigator with his gaze lowered. He says the cult of his dreams is one where good men have power. With a hand on his chest, he promises that he will save the innocent this time. He finishes by saying his goal is to defeat those who deserve it and save the innocent. The investigator says he's very different from the rumors. Curious, he asks the investigator to explain what he means. The young man reveals that people say he's not fit to be the next Cheonma. Seeing the young man, he just stares at him in silence after the revelation. With a smile, he says that could be a compliment in disguise. He continues, saying that being fit doesn't seem like a good thing to him. With a distant look, he reveals he doesn't wish to rule through intimidation. He then says it's time for a great change to happen there. Surprised, the investigator just stares, not knowing what to say. With conviction, he states that the cult needs to shed its old skin. He continues, saying that if he fails, his family and the cult will be destroyed. The next day, a man shouts that there's a big problem at the palace. Running down the hall, he follows the man to see what happened. Arriving at the scene, he observes it with a serious, focused gaze. He sees an injured man on the ground, surrounded by several armed guards. A man yells at him not to take another step forward. Approaching, he asks Daryung how he is, concerned about his injuries. The investigator says he's fine, but one of his colleagues was hurt. Seeing the injuries, he says the man needs a healer immediately. Seeing the men carrying the injured colleague, he glares at the captain angrily. Turning to the captain, he asks if he was the one who did this. With a smirk, the captain takes the blame, confirming it was him. Unfazed, he asks why the captain injured one of his men. The captain says the boy bumped into him and he just corrected him. With a serious look, he says the captain must have bumped into him instead. Hearing the accusation, the captain just stares at him with a suspicious look. With a laugh, the captain agrees that his summary of the situation was accurate. He then accuses the captain, saying the right word is poison. Surprised, the captain asks what he meant by that word. Explaining further, he says the captain's people are nothing to him. Confused, the captain asks what he's talking about, not understanding at all. He accuses him of killing cult members the previous year. With a smirk, the captain says there's no shortage of idiots who disrespect the guard. Warning the captain, he says he has the authority to execute anyone. Surprised, the captain just stares, not believing the threat he just heard. After the threat, the hallway falls silent for a brief moment. Laughing, the captain doubts he has the guts to follow through on the threat. He realizes the captain cares too much about appearances. According to him, the captain acts tough, but doesn't understand the truth. Taking a step, he moves, and the captain's men react. Seeing the men get ready, he advances, undeterred by the threat. The captain threatens him, saying that messing with them is messing with the guard. With a smile, he says that at least he isn't hiding behind others. Showing his hand, the captain says he got lucky today, but it won't happen again. Proposing a deal, he says he won't use his right hand either. Surprised, the captain just stares at him, not believing what he just heard. Mockingly, he asks if Muguk will cry to his father if he gets hurt. He promises, swearing he won't hold him responsible, even if he dies in the fight. With a smile, the captain prepares for the coming fight. Shouting, he accepts the challenge and draws his sword, ready to fight. The investigator warns that Captain Go fights just as well with his left hand as with his right. With a slight smile, he understands why the captain accepted the challenge. Drawing his own sword, he prepares for the duel against the captain. Surprised, the men watch the two warriors prepare for combat. Charging forward, he attacks the captain with a swift and powerful sword strike. The impact of the blow throws all the men back, clearing a space. The captain manages to block the attack, the blade close to his face. Seizing the opening, he leaps and spins, disarming the captain with a kick. With a focused gaze, he watches the captain's sword fly through the air. Without wasting a moment, he catches the captain's sword in mid-air. With a swift motion, he attacks and slashes the men's arms. Screaming in pain, the captain reels from the impact of the strikes. Without hesitation, he lands a punch on the captain's face, sending him flying. With the sword, he strikes the captain hard on the head, knocking him out. Seeing the captain down, the men rush forward to protect him from further attacks. Shocked, the investigator screams in despair at the scene he just witnessed. Seeing the men advance, he just stares at them with a serious look. With a single strike, he slits the throats of all the men at once. After the attack, the men fall to the ground, lifeless, before him. Surprised, the other guards and the investigator are shocked by the scene. Pointing his sword, he says their crime is treason, and there is no forgiveness. Seeing his gaze, one of the men begs for mercy. Terrified, looking at the fallen captain, he prepares for his next move. With a fixed stare, he approaches the captain, ready for the interrogation. He then asks if the captain knows what happened to the families. With a bruised face, the captain just stares at him, unable to answer. He says the captain didn't think twice before committing his crimes. Begging for his life, the captain says he made a terrible mistake. Telling him to shut up, he stomps hard on the captain's head. After the stomp, the captain is finished, with no chance of escaping his punishment. Shocked, the other guards just watch the scene, not believing what they saw. Seeing the scene, the investigator is also frozen, not knowing what to do. Suddenly, a furious voice asks who he thinks he is to be killing people. Changing scenes, a woman plays an instrument, creating a calm and serene atmosphere. In a flashback, A woman dances while another person watches her closely. Back in the present, the commander pours a drink, ready to talk. He says he heard about the incident with his men, and Muguk confirms it. Placing the bottle on the table, he says he had no choice but to use him. Muguk says he was his right-hand man, but he's already blaming him. Taking a drink, the commander ignores the accusation and calmly continues the conversation. He says he understands, but questioning the captain's death would be complicated. Putting the glass on the table, he proposes they just forget the matter. With a smile, he says that 3 subordinates for a captain's life is a fair trade. Thanking him for the gesture, he prepares to continue the negotiation. He says he agrees to resolve it peacefully, but there's a problem. Surprised, the commander asks what kind of problem there could be now. He explains that he has no evidence to show, as he's on an official mission. The hard part, he says, is that the report involves the 1st Division. Holding his glass, the commander stares at him without saying a single word. He says that to close the case, he needs solid evidence. Taking a drink, the commander remains silent, ignoring the pressure he's applying. Without mincing words, he says the commander needs to hand over the culprits. Changing scenes, the investigator asks what the young master is doing there. He says he came to see his injured friend, and the investigator explains the situation. The young man then thanks him for sending someone to help his friend. Entering the room, he says the injured man is technically his colleague. After the response, the investigator remains silent, just observing the master. Suddenly, a voice greets him, saying it's good to see him again. Looking back, he sees a man approaching and recognizes him. He identifies the man as the demon doctor, the most skilled healer in the cult. The doctor says that luckily, the young man's life is not in danger. Asking not to spare any expense, he says the men were following orders. Seeing his determination, he just stares at him with a serious, focused gaze. He wonders why everyone is looking at him with such strange faces. Seeing the reaction, one of the men thanks him for helping everyone. Embarrassed, he just coughs, unsure how to react to the thanks. The investigator asks what the commander said, and he reveals the plan. Shocked, the young man can't believe the commander betrayed his most beloved officer. He corrects him, saying that exploited would be the right word for the situation. The investigator asks what the plan is, and he says the bait has been set. Not understanding, the young man asks what kind of bait he prepared for them. With a smile, he says he'll let him know when the bait is taken. The investigator asks what to do, and he invites him for a drink. With no other option, the young man just stares at him with a thoughtful expression. With a smile, the investigator says that in that case, he'll pay for the drinks. Seeing his reaction, he just smiles, pleased with the young man's attitude. The next day, the demonic guard sends a large pile of documents. The investigator explains that they are murder records and promissory notes from the captain. With a smile, he says they finally took the bait he laid. He asks the investigator to find the smartest member of the 1st Division. Saying he's going to find the commander, he promises to buy the young man some time. Back in the throne room, he says evidence has emerged from the residence. The commander says that's a huge relief and invites him for a drink. But he reveals that, unfortunately, there's a small problem with the evidence. Surprised, the commander asks what the problem is with the evidence they found. He explains that the evidence was provided by the demonic guard itself, which is suspicious. Unconcerned, the commander asks if the source is really that important. Explaining the situation, he says the strategist will question the investigation's integrity. Thoughtful, the commander reflects on his words, considering the whole situation. He then proposes that he pretend to work, with the commander's blessing, of course. Seeing the proposal, the commander just stares at him in silence, without answering. He says he doesn't like the situation, but that it's just a formality. With no other option, the commander agrees and promises his men will cooperate. With a focused gaze, he prepares to explain his plan to the commander. He says he doesn't need classified documents, but rather other ones. With the man tied up, he explains that he's going to compare the handwriting. The man, Gu Yang, asks why he was brought to this place. With his arms crossed, he faces the man, ready for the interrogation. Without mincing words, he accuses him of forging the killer's record book. Denying the accusation, the man says he doesn't know what he's talking about. He says he understands the man was just following orders from his superior, but the man continues to deny it, saying he never received such orders. With an understanding look, he says he understands the fear he's feeling. After listening, the man just stares at him with a worried expression on his face. Suddenly, he says the man is free to go, completely surprising him. He explains that he won't torture him, since he was just following orders. After releasing him, he stares at him in silence for a brief moment. He warns him that even if he lets him go, Cheonyang will kill him anyway. Confused, the man asks what he meant by that threat. He explains that the commander will think he betrayed him if he leaves unharmed. With a smile, he says the commander will assume he told him everything. Finally, he says the man knows what the commander is capable of. Reporting his findings, Dae Young-seo confirms that Cheonyang-gu ordered all the attacks. With his arms crossed, Muguk just listens in silence, showing no reaction. Dae-young continues his report, saying they treated the murders like a simple game. He adds, concerned, that Commander Cheonyang will certainly not allow himself to be taken. Muguk keeps a fixed gaze, listening to the entire explanation without changing his expression. Responding firmly, he says the commander won't be arrested, leaving Dae-young confused. He then coldly declares that he won't arrest him, but rather take his life. Completely shocked, Daeryong-seo can't hide the astonishment on his face. Muguk then explains that arresting Cheon-yang would make his dangerous brother, Cheonpa, take action. According to him, the old man wouldn't stand by, which would complicate things even more. He then details how Cheonpa would forge evidence and blame someone else. The conclusion is that if Cheon-yang lives, many more people will end up dead. Muguk also warns him that not even he would escape the inevitable purge to come. But with the commander's death, he says everything changes and they only need the proof. Swallowing hard, Daeryong asks if he's sure, because the Blade Demon will come. Standing up, Muguk says that Cheonpa isn't the type to waste his life on revenge. As he walks away, Daeryong-seo asks where he is going now. With a smile, he reaffirms that, as he said, he's going to kill the Lord Commander. Utterly surprised, Daeryong asks if he intends to do it right at that moment. Elsewhere, an old man thanks Muguk for finally closing the case. Saying he's happy, the old man admits that his departure makes him a little sad. Muguk promises not to forget the favor, and the man replies that he will never forget his help. He then comments that the old man won't forget because of everything he lost. Grabbing the bottle, he suggests they make a toast to celebrate. With a big smile, the man accepts the proposal, saying it would be his pleasure. Then, he starts pouring the drink into the cup of the man in front of him. Suddenly, Muguk breaks the silence and asks why he did it. Completely confused, the man asks what exactly he's talking about. Then Muguk questions him about why he hired the demonic guard. Holding the cup, the old man just stares at him with a very serious expression. Placing the cup on the table, he stares at Muguk with a serious expression. Replying, he says Muguk should have asked the late division captain about that. As he pours himself a drink, Muguk asks what a mere puppet would know about the matter. With a fixed gaze, Cheon-yang asks what the young man is trying to imply. Staring him down, Muguk says he wants to know what he really thinks about everything. He then taunts him, saying his heart is filled only with malice, and shatters the cup. With a furious expression, Cheon-yang asks if he has lost his mind. Calmly taking a sip, Muguk replies that Cheon-yang is the only one who has truly gone mad here. Shouting that he's had enough of these games, Cheon-yang unleashes his power, destroying the entire table. Amidst the flying debris, Muguk remains seated, not moving a single inch. The two then stare each other down, ready for the confrontation that is about to begin. Then, a blade emerges from Cheon-yang's staff, and he stares back with a confused expression. Ignoring the weapon, Muguk simply finishes what's left of his drink. He then prepares for a counterattack, channeling his own energy for the strike. Shocked, Cheon-yang asks how he did that upon seeing his own cup shatter by itself. Getting to his feet, Muguk faces Cheon-yang-gu, the Lord Commander of the Demonic Guard. He then places him under arrest, accusing him of abuse of power and conspiracy to commit murder. Completely bewildered, Cheon-yang starts to say that this whole situation is absurd. Just then, he feels the blade piercing him and screams that this isn't an arrest. Muguk informs him that he will be executed either way and tells him to go quietly. Gripping the hilt of his sword, he prepares to end it all. With a single strike, he pierces Cheon-yang's chest without any hesitation. Utterly shocked, the commander says he had no idea he possessed such power. He adds that he didn't know the young master was hiding so much strength. With no strength left, his head simply slumps forward in his final moment. Outside the room, the men watch the scene, completely paralyzed by fear. Sitting in the chair, Cheon-yang's lifeless body marks the end of the confrontation. Turning to the crowd, Muguk announces that the commander was killed while resisting arrest. In silence, everyone present remains shocked, unsure how to react to what they've just witnessed. Shouting to Daeryong, he orders the immediate arrest of the entire 1st Division. Accepting the order, Daeryong-seo replies that he will do as commanded. Then, Muguk turns to Hojang and orders him to arrest the 1st Division. He shouts that he has the Cheonma's authority to execute his decisions on the spot. Firmly, Hojang replies that his will shall be done without question. His gaze turns serious, ready to carry out the new mission he's been given. Daeryong-seo and Hojang exchange a quick glance before taking action. After giving the orders, he turns to leave the place. A faint smile appears on his face before he finally leaves the hall. Walking towards a grand palace, he heads for his next objective. Entering the main hall, he walks along the carpet towards the great throne. There, Cheonma awaits him, seated and accompanied by Mayong-sama and Cheonpa. He continues walking through the long hall, getting closer and closer to the leader. His face remains serious as he approaches the cult's leader. Beside the throne, Cheonpa watches the young man's arrival with great attention. His watchful gaze follows every step Muguk takes towards them. He stares back, maintaining the same serious expression without looking away. Standing before the throne, Muguk bows to the leaders present in the hall. Watched by Myung-sama, he positions himself to speak formally with them. Staring straight ahead, he prepares to give his official testimony. Then, Cheonpa greets him, saying it's been a long time since they last saw each other. Confirming this, Cheonpa calls him by name very directly. Muguk then says he would like to explain all the recent events, but Cheonpa replies that it's all in the report, and Muguk insists on telling him in person. He then waits in silence, expecting permission to continue speaking. Remaining serious, he awaits Cheonpa's response to his insistent request. In the background, Cheonma and Myung-sama just observe the interaction between the two. Beginning to speak, he reveals that his investigation uncovered serious crimes committed by Cheonpa's brother. Cheonpa listens intently as Muguk continues to provide the details of his investigation. Afterward, he says that it's all right and that his brother should be punished. But Cheonpa questions why Cheonyang would attack him, since his crimes were exposed. Hearing the question, Muguk remains silent, not answering Cheonpa's query. In response, he suggests the commander didn't accept being arrested by someone so young. Then, Cheonpa reveals he saw the body, killed by a single blow to the heart. Commenting on the strike, he says that no one knew Muguk's true skill. Trying to answer, he begins to explain the situation to his master. He then says he should thank his father, as Cheonyang didn't use his full strength. Gritting his teeth, Cheonpa listens to the young man's explanation without a word. Saying he understands, he thanks him for his honesty, stating it puts him at ease. Afterward, Muguk apologizes, saying he feels bad for killing his brother. Without a word, Cheonpa just turns away, ending the matter with him. Seated on the throne, Cheonma merely observes the tense interaction between the two warriors. Keeping a serious gaze, Cheonpa stares at him without showing any specific emotion. Cheonma then suggests he go rest, as he has a funeral to prepare. Thanking him for the consideration, Cheonpa gives a respectful bow toward the throne. After saying his farewell, he turns and begins to leave the hall. With their backs to each other, the two warriors end their tense encounter. Watching Cheonpa walk away, he remains silent in the great throne room. Returning to his position, he turns to face the leader Cheonma again. At that, Myung-sama congratulates him, saying his work and the evidence were excellent. Myung-sama then asks if he happened to get injured during the mission. Smiling, Muguk replies that he's fine, thanks to the care of his father and master. Looking closely, Myung-sama says he can't help but feel something is different. Muguk asks what it is, but he just tells him to forget it. Soon after, a guard approaches, carrying a long, well-decorated box. Arriving in front of him, the guard says the Supreme Commander has decided to reward him. As the box is opened, a large, imposing sword is revealed to everyone. Surprised, Muguk recognizes the weapon, unable to believe what he's seeing. Myung-sama then explains that it's the famous Black Demon sword. Holding the blade, he's informed that it is a sacred weapon of the cult. With a slight smile, he finally holds the powerful sword in his hands. He then says he feels honored, but that another blade would suit him better. Cheonma then states that if there's a perfect blade for him, that's the one. Drawing the blade, he says he honestly thought his father knew him better. Wielding the sword, he displays the entire blade with a firm movement. With a slight smile, he comments that the blade effortlessly emits a chill. Without changing his expression, Cheonma watches him in silence from his golden throne. At this, Myung-sama turns to the leader, not knowing exactly what to say. Myung-sama then asks if he is happy to see his son so satisfied, but he sheathes the blade, saying he isn't sure if he deserves such a reward. Myung-sama reassures him, confessing he hadn't expected such a clean resolution to the case. Turning to the throne, he asks if the leader predicted this entire outcome. In response, Cheonma says the boy would be lucky just to get out alive. Hearing the answer, he just keeps his gaze fixed, showing no reaction. In a quick flashback, he's seen training hard in a dark forest. The memory continues, showing the moment he consumes an essence pill. The scene ends with the image of Cheonyang's lifeless body in the chair. Looking to the side, he seems to finally understand the whole situation. Holding the sword, he says he knows why his father chose this blade. The reward was a clear message for Cheonpa not to touch his son. Gripping the hilt tightly, he accepts his father's message and protection. With the sword in hand, he thanks his father for the generous reward. Completing his thanks, he says he understands the meaning behind the gift. From the throne, Cheonma just watches him in silence, showing no reaction. Afterward, Cheonma dismisses him, and he just cracks a slight smile. Once outside, Cheonpa calls out to him, asking him to keep him company. Unsurprised, he just looks in the direction of the voice that called him. The scene changes to a garden, where he finds Cheonpa waiting for him further down. He remarks that the old fox wouldn't leave without saying a single word. Getting closer, he approaches to finally meet the Blade Master. The two stare at each other seriously, with the tension rising between them every second. Sitting beside him, Muguk hears Cheonpa say the summer will be hot. Imagining the scene, Cheonpa shouts, calling him an inexperienced, scheming brat. He continues the verbal assault, questioning how he dared to take his brother's life. Filled with rage, he threatens to tear his body limb from limb. Then, he swears to scatter all the pieces over his deceased brother's grave. In this scene, Muguk just grits his teeth, enduring the immense pressure of the confrontation. The two face off, preparing for a direct and extremely violent fight. With a hateful smile, Cheonpa bares his teeth, full of confidence in his victory. Snapping out of the fantasy, he smiles, pleased with the idea of that furious scene. At that, he asks if that shouldn't have been his line in that moment, but in his version, Muguk blocks his hand, preventing him from drawing his sword. Shouting in anger, he curses him for undermining the cult's order for personal gain. He then threatens to break all his bones if he defends his corrupt brother. Smiling back, Muguk asks if that was the response he was expecting. Utterly shocked, Cheonpa is left speechless, staring at the young man in pure astonishment. Suddenly, he starts laughing loudly and uncontrollably right there. The laughter continues, leaving Muguk with his teeth clenched and the guards confused. Gradually stopping his laughter, he starts speaking to Muguk again. He then says Muguk could have spared some of his dignity. Replying to the master, he says his intention was to resolve everything peacefully. But he explains that his brother crossed a line and went too far. Saying he understands, Cheonpa just nods his head in agreement with the explanation. He then looks back at him, maintaining a serious expression during the conversation. Afterward, he asks why Cheonpa allowed the corruption in the guard to continue. Without hesitation, Cheonpa replies that his brother simply wouldn't listen to him anymore. He then admits that, in the end, he's no saint either. Confessing the truth, he says he felt relieved by Cheonyang's death. He explains that he was relieved his brother could no longer drag him down. After the confession, the two sit in silence for a moment. Muguk then says he perfectly understands how his master is feeling. He reveals that he would feel the same if he heard about his own brother's death. He finishes by saying it would be a comfort not to have to get his own hands dirty. He faces Cheonpa, ending the conversation with his shocking revelation. Sitting side by side, the two remain silent for a long moment. Then Muguk looks to the side, staring at Cheonpa with a serious expression. Surprised, Cheonpa glances over, realizing the young man is watching him. His eyes narrow slightly as he tries to understand what's happening. Getting up, he says the summer will be hot, just as he said before. Leaving Muguk behind, he starts to walk away, holding his sword. As he walks away, Muguk says that luckily, he really likes the heat. Looking to the side, he watches his master leave without saying another word. Watching him go, he reflects on what just happened between them. He then continues to ponder, unsure of Cheonpa's next move. Looking at the sky, he wonders if Cheonpa will just leave everything behind. Regardless of what happens, he concludes that he has no regrets. In a dark room, he prepares to unsheath his new sword. Drawing the blade, he understands that the first moments are always critical. The blade then connects with him, forging a bond on a different level. Holding the new sword, it's explained that a poor connection limits its full power. Smiling at the blade, he introduces himself as its new and final master. The sword then reacts in his hands, showing a very strong initial connection. Determined to test it, he prepares to channel his energy directly into the weapon. He then begins to infuse all his energy into the sword's blade. Satisfied with the result, he says the sword is unique and that he already likes it. Ready to train, he takes a combat stance with his new weapon. Stomping his foot hard on the ground, he begins his intense swordsmanship practice. He then slams the sword into the ground, testing the power of the direct impact. Beginning his training, he says he'll use this sword technique for now. He then adds that he'll teach more skills, asking it to keep him alive until then. As time passes, he continues his training from day to night. Even late at night, he keeps training alone, showing no signs of fatigue. Watching him from a distance, and Lee spies on him while holding a tray of food. She then starts walking toward him, bringing his meal. After training, he appears, sweaty, holding the sword in one hand. The scene then shifts, showing the passage of time to a sunny morning. Opening the door, he is met with a completely unexpected scene. A crowd of elite warriors awaits him outside the room. Surprised, he wonders what the axe demons are doing there. Glancing to the side, he tries to figure out if they were sent by Cheonpa. They all stare at him with eyes that clearly show their intent to kill. Seeing the hostility, he realizes he's being silently attacked with energy. Unleashing their own energy, the group of warriors glares at him menacingly. Despite feeling the pressure, he stands his ground, not retreating a single step. Narrowing his eyes, he wonders if they mean to intimidate him in his own home. He then realizes he can use that energy to his advantage in battle. Clenching his fists, he prepares to use a special strengthening technique. Using the enemy's energy, he strengthens his body for the coming confrontation. Enduring the pressure, he says this is the perfect chance to strengthen his body. Gritting his teeth, he continues to absorb the energy being directed at him. Without understanding, the warriors keep using their energy to try to intimidate him. Standing tall, he walks toward the group, withstanding all of their power. Among the warriors, one is surprised by his unexpected resistance. The technique advances, moving from the second to the third stage of strengthening. With a strained smile, he asks for more power, wanting to absorb it all. Shouting for more, he forces the group to unleash even more energy on him. Getting closer, he continues walking toward the center of the group of warriors. The energy around him intensifies, approaching the fifth and final stage. With his eyes closed, he continues to absorb the energy without stopping for a second. He then opens his eyes, realizing the energy has stopped flowing. In the middle of the circle of warriors, he prepares for the coming fight. All around him, the warriors stare at him with shocked expressions. Looking to the side, he glares at one of the warriors with a cold look. Staring down the warrior, he leaves him completely paralyzed, and unable to react. At that, one of the warriors drops his axe, showing a sign of surrender. Parting the way, the crowd lets him pass in a clear gesture of respect. Keeping a serious gaze, he observes the reaction of everyone around him. Then, he takes the first step, beginning to walk among the warriors. Walking among them, Muguk moves forward without showing the slightest sign of fear. With a smile, he says it seems he's earned the approval of the demons. Changing scenes, the throne room appears completely empty and silent. Now, in the throne room, he waits, standing before the main seat. Appearing behind him, Cheonma asks if he happens to desire that throne. Turning around, he replies that he doesn't want to be tied down to that specific chair. Then, his father asks if he's there to speak in circles again. Approaching the throne, Cheonma simply asks him to come closer. Standing before him, his father orders him to sit right there. After he sits, his father asks how the place feels. A wide shot of the hall shows the vast size of the place where they are. Looking to the side, he just observes the room in silence for a moment. An ancient and imposing statue in the corner of the large room catches his eye. Disappointed, he says he thought he'd be more excited, but he felt nothing. In response, his father says the exact same thing happened to him. Sitting on the throne, he listens to his father, unable to understand that feeling. He then reveals that the axe demons went there on their own. Surprised, the father asks if he knew that all along. He then explains that he started shaking as soon as he left them behind. At this, the father asks if he was perhaps afraid of them. Clenching his fist, he replies that he was afraid of his own misjudgment. He continues, saying that if he had survived, he wouldn't be the heir after the massacre. Coming to a conclusion, he says his fear was having to risk everything. Turning around, the father hears him say that for some reason, he wanted to see him. Looking to the side, he wonders why he wanted to see his father. With a focused gaze, the father says they can't look back. Looking to the side, he listens carefully to his father's words. He then realizes his father was trying to comfort him with his words. Suddenly, he looks to the side, focusing on something in the dark room. Without changing his expression, he sits there in complete silence. Turning to his father, he says he has a thought on his mind. Pointing at the statue, he suggests swapping it for something more pleasant. He continues, suggesting statues of the 4 great flowers as an option. Excitedly, he says that one in each corner of the palace would liven up the place. Awkwardly, he stops talking when he realizes his father didn't like the idea. Getting up, he says it's time to go, as the throne is his father's. He then starts down the stairs, leaving the seat for his father. Stopping halfway, he turns and calls out to his father again. With a serious look, he asks if he has permission to kill the blade demon. He faces his father, waiting for an answer to his question. Maintaining his serious gaze, his father just stares at him without saying a word. Laughing loudly, Cheonma's voice echoes throughout the grand palace hall. He then warns that Cheonyang was within reach, but forbids Muguk from killing his brother. Without responding, Muguk stares at his father in silence, just listening to every word. With a faint smile, he asks why he forced him to fight. Agreeing with his son, Cheonma says he will take full responsibility. He then announces that he will put Muguk in command of the entire Hwangcheon pavilion. Then, he asks what's wrong. Since Muguk wanted to restore discipline, Muguk remains quiet, just staring at his father with a very serious gaze. Gritting his teeth, he shows his dissatisfaction with the current situation. Father and son then face each other for a long moment of pure tension. Closing his eyes, Muguk seems to ponder the words he has just heard. Facing his son, Cheonma maintains his imposing posture, showing no reaction. Making a decision, Muguk finally clenches his fist firmly at his side. He says he needs something to defend himself, and Cheonma tells him to speak. With a determined look, Muguk prepares to make his great demand. Asking for access to the archives, Muguk makes his great demand to his father. In this place, manuscripts and tomes hold all sorts of precious martial secrets, but Cheonma warns that he is mistaken if he thinks he will master any technique. Muguk already knows the archive holds secrets with very enigmatic verses, so he says he would like to see how fate treats him inside. Faced with the request, Cheonma stands in silence, giving no immediate answer. At this, Muguk wonders what his father's plan might be at that moment. Cheonma then announces that he will have 7 days of full access to the archives. Holding his sword, Muguk thanks his father for the permission he has just received. Shifting to the archives, an immense hallway is revealed, filled with ancient manuscripts. Once inside, he remembers he returned to the cult to obtain an item. Recalling the past, he was seeking the evil spirit needed for the regression ritual. In this flashback, no one recognized him because of his completely different features. It took years, but he rose through the ranks until he finally met the new commander. That's when he heard the story about the 4 steps of the wind god technique. It is then revealed that the one who found the 4 steps was Baekdo-ju. Serving a drink, he reveals he became commander by finding the lost technique. Then Muguk asks why everyone thought the technique was lost, sir. Taking his drink, he explains that it wasn't exactly in an ordinary book. Back in the present, Muguk observes the bookshelf with a focused gaze. Standing there, he positions himself in the exact section the former leader indicated. Looking at the floor, he finds some manuscripts being used as a support. Returning to the flashback, he asks the leader where the book was hidden. The former leader then reveals that the verses were propping up the 19th shelf. Picking up the dusty manuscript, Muguk finally holds it in his hands. He then observes the cover of the old book he just found. Confirming the story, he realizes the book had been there all along. Opening the manuscript, he reads that there are 4 steps to traverse the world. With a slight smile on his face, he shows his satisfaction with the discovery. Sitting in meditation, he prepares to learn the 4 forms of the technique. There were 4 main forms: the shadow step, the shimmering step, the piercing step, and the lightning step. The first being the shadow step, a movement technique for pure infiltration. By mastering the technique, it would be possible to disappear even with dozens of people watching intently. Next, the shimmering step was a purely defensive technique against unavoidable attacks. It allowed him to find a way to survive against all odds. The third was the piercing step, a technique for finding openings in the opponent. With this move, he could easily neutralize any defense or evasion. Lastly, the lightning step was considered the pinnacle of speed itself. Finishing his meditation, Muguk remained seated on the archive floor for a while. 7 days later, in the palace, he announces to his father that he has finally returned. Bowing, he greets the leader with his hands clasped as a sign of respect. Standing in the middle of the hall, he awaits his father's orders from the throne. Cheonma just stares at his son, remaining silent for a long, tense moment. Then he asks what Mugok managed to learn during his time in the archives. Replying that it was a movement technique, Cheonma then asks which one it was. Revealing what he learned, Muguk says it was the 4 steps of the wind god. At this, Cheonma warns he's not in the mood for jokes and asks how he mastered it. Muguk then replies that he wouldn't dare lie about such a matter. Staring at his son, the cult leader just watches him with a serious gaze. Cheonma then demands that he demonstrate, but Muguk asks what he'll get in return. With his eyes closed, the father seems to think for a moment about his son's proposal. Then he replies that the reward will be letting him leave the room alive. With a slight smile, Muguk accepts the challenge his father proposed. Without wasting any more time, he starts moving at an impressive speed across the hall. Surprised by the movement, Cheonma tries to follow the blur with a watchful eye. Stopping in the center of the room, Muguk prepares for the real demonstration. With a sudden flash of light, the leader's eyes widen, not understanding what's happening. He then demonstrates the shadow step, the first form of the legendary technique. Shocked by the scene, Muguk's father is left speechless, completely paralyzed. Taking a step back, he is startled by his son's unbelievable speed. Moving throughout the hall, he creates multiple images of himself in the process. Appearing in front of the throne, he faces his father with a very defiant gaze. Impressed by the scene, Cheonma asks where he found the 4 steps. In the middle of the hall, the two face each other in a brief, tense moment. Taking a step forward, Mugok replies that it was in the archives, as expected. At that, Cheonma grabs him and shouts that he won't be fooled by lies. Without reacting to his father, Mugok just looks away and remains silent. Cheonma then states that the 4 steps are not kept in the celestial archives, but Mugok insists he knows very well what he saw and learned in there. Annoyed by his stubbornness, Cheonma asks if he dares to continue the act. Mugok then asks if he's certain he searched every secret text in the archives. Hearing the question, Cheonma stares at him without an immediate answer. Then, Muguk says he didn't know it was there, as he found it by pure chance. Once again, father and son face each other without saying another word. Asked about the location, he reveals the book was propping up a crooked shelf. Closing his eyes, Cheonma seems to finally understand the whole crazy situation. He then guesses that Muguk destroyed the important parts, surprising his own son. With a spin, Cheonma explains that's exactly what he would have done. At that, the two go back to staring at each other in the middle of the grand throne room. He then demands that Mugok recite the key verses of the technique he just learned. Ready for the challenge, Mugok faces his father without any hesitation. With a smile, he shows that he was already expecting his father to ask this. He then reveals his goal is to defeat Mugi and keep everyone safe. When it's all over, he plans to wander the lands until his father steps down from power. For that reason, teaching the technique wouldn't be a big problem for him. But Cheonma cuts him off and tells him to stop, saying he doesn't need to recite it. Maintaining his posture, he stares at his son with a serious and commanding gaze. Muguk then warns that everything in life has a price that must be paid. Hearing the response, the leader looks at his son with a sharp gaze. He points out that the technique he learned came at no cost, but Cheonma denies it. With a disdainful look, Cheonma remains silent in the face of that statement. Muguk then smiles and comments on the nerve his father has always had. Confirming what his father said, he states that he was playing the long game. At that, Cheonma tells him to name his price for the technique. Without hesitation, he prepares to reveal what he wants in exchange for the knowledge. He then reveals that he wants the knowledge of the divine art of demon protection. This secret self-defense martial art is knowledge exclusive to Cheonma. Shouting that it's impossible, Cheonma says the art is only for him and his successor. Muguk then suggests his father could teach him very discreetly. Surprised by his audacity, Cheonma asks what he just said. He then explains that the art is defensive and no one would ever know the secret. Hearing the proposal, Cheonma just stares to the side without giving an answer. Saying his goodbyes, he tells his father to send someone for him if he changes his mind. But Cheonma interrupts him and says that the 4 steps come first. Turning around in surprise, he questions if his father is really going to teach him the forms. With a smile, Muguk asks if he'd like the technique to be taught now. At this, Cheonma asks if his son trusts him so much, even if he doesn't reciprocate. Without hesitation, he says he has no fears or suspicions about the proposal. Finishing the sentence, he says his father wouldn't stoop so low in front of him. Hearing the answer, Cheonma falls silent for a brief, tense moment. Taking a deep breath, he finally tells Muguk to recite all the verses of the technique. Accepting the challenge, he answers yes, and prepares to recite everything. Opening his mouth, he begins to recite the first verses of the legendary technique. Then, he starts speaking the secret verses of the technique to his father. With great attention, Cheonma listens to every word Muguk is saying in the hall. Closing his eyes, he concentrates completely on his own son's recitation. As he recites, the two stare at each other with extremely serious expressions. Reciting the verses, his voice echoes throughout the main throne room. Outside the hall, his voice spreads across the rooftops of the great palace. Reaching the city, the verses echo throughout the enormous fortress. Finally, his voice reverberates throughout the entire demonic cult complex. Listening intently, Cheonma closes his eyes, processing the complete recitation. Opening his eyes, he looks at Muguk with a gaze of pure admiration. After the recitation, he asks if his father would like him to repeat it. Taking a step, Cheonma says it won't be necessary and begins to move. Surprised, Muguk's eyes widen as he sees his father's movement in the hall. At high speed, the leader creates multiple images of himself everywhere. Shocked, he realizes his father's movement is completely different from his own. This makes him question if there's something special in the interpretation of the technique's verses. Disappearing and reappearing, Cheonma demonstrates his total mastery of the technique. Stopping suddenly, he admits that it is truly an exceptional technique. Looking to the side, Muguk remains silent, just watching the scene. Then he wonders if Mugi could defeat his father with the technique. Next, Cheonma announces he will pass the divine art of protection onto him. Shouting yes, Muguk shows his excitement to finally learn the technique. Changing scenes, he appears with a bruised forehead without saying a word. Angry, Enli shouts she'll find whoever did that, but Muguk reveals the truth. Speechless, she stares at Muguk, not knowing how to react to the revelation. Returning to the meditation scene, he finally manages to master the new technique. With a sigh, he confirms that he has successfully learned the art of protection. In another flashback, he tells his father that they now have a secret. Before he can finish, Cheonma hits him with a precise flick on the forehead. Making a gesture, he warns his son not to push his luck. And Lee then asks why he doesn't go, reminding him of his duty. With a smile, Muguk just looks at her without giving an immediate answer. She then comments that he never used to joke with her like this before. Calling her name, he turns and faces his bodyguard seriously. Then he says he can't be like this now, but he will change. Confused, she just watches him, not understanding what he's trying to say. He then vows that he will find a way to nullify the side effect. Asking her to hold on a little longer, he looks at her with determination. Hearing the promise, she looks at him with a surprised expression. With a confident smile, he turns and gets ready to leave. He then says he told his father the cult needs to change for the better. He adds that the place shouldn't force anyone to do anything. Hearing this, An Lee stares at him with an expression of pure surprise. Unable to look away, she continues to process what she just heard. Taking a step forward, he positions himself and calls for his bodyguard. He then tells An Lee to listen very carefully to what he's about to say. Clasping her hands, she says yes and waits for her master's order. Then, he announces that he is relieving her of her duties at that very moment. Shocked by the news, she covers her mouth, unable to believe it. She then asks if he's serious about dismissing her as his bodyguard, but he appoints her as the new leader of the Hidden Shadows group. Confused by the appointment, she stares at him, not understanding what's happening. She then says she's never heard of a group with that name in the cult. With a smile, he confirms she's right, as it will be a new group. She questions being appointed to a non-existent role, so he rephrases. Asking if she accepts being the leader, he makes the official invitation to Anne. The two then look at each other for a moment, waiting for her answer. Clasping her hands, she accepts the offer with honor, calling him a good master. The scene changes to a bustling city, with people walking everywhere. Elsewhere, a group of mercenaries gathers for a new mission. With his arms crossed, Muguk recalls that creating the unit isn't so easy. He then reveals he will use a past incident to get money. Introducing himself as Dang Yang, the leader warns that the mission is dangerous. He then threatens that anyone who steps out of line will die by his hands. Approaching, he asks if he can count on Muguk's skills. Muguk then asks if he'll acknowledge him if he happens to take him down in a fight. Annoyed, the leader tells him not to be arrogant and threatens the young man. Unfazed, he says he won't cause any trouble as long as he gets paid. Keeping a fixed gaze, he just stares at the leader without showing any reaction. Then, the mission is revealed: to take a woman and a child to Nampyeong. Unlike before, he plans to ensure they survive this long journey. Bowing, the child thanks their protector. After bowing, the mother and child walk towards the carriage. In the forest, the entire escort group rides at high speed. As night falls, the leader announces they will camp right there. Handing out the food, he tells everyone to eat while they can. At the camp, one of the men complains that the food is just cured meat. Another mercenary tells him to just eat and keep his strength for the journey. Lying there, he remembers that in the past, this group was ambushed and disappeared. Under the starry sky, a strange noise breaks the silence of the dark night. Suddenly, one of the mercenaries starts choking and spitting up a lot of blood. Around the campfire, several other mercenaries fall to the ground, lifeless. Startled by the scene, Muguk realizes they have all been poisoned. Getting to his feet, he reveals himself as the only one unaffected. Surprised, one of the men asks how he's still able to stand. Approaching him, Dang Yang emerges from the darkness of the forest. Muguk then says he didn't eat the food that was handed out earlier. Drawing his sword, the leader says he would have preferred the taste of poison. Muguk then laments that the escort leader himself poisoned the food. Staring at the traitor, he says that killing for coins is a pathetic way to live. Unfazed, he replies that he'll spend the money on wine and women. He then tells Muguk to worry about his own neck instead. But the traitor says it seems the job here is already done. From the shadows, a group of mysterious men emerges and surrounds the camp. Seeing the newcomers, he realizes they are a very skilled bunch. Threatening to set the carriage on fire, he orders the woman and child to come out. With nowhere to run, the carriage door remains closed and still. Exiting the carriage, the woman hugs her son in fear, protecting him. The group's leader then thanks them, saying it wasn't easy to track them down. Crying, she begs Master Guan to at least spare her son's life. Without showing any emotion, Guan looks at the woman's plea with a cold gaze. He then says he will grant her request for old time's sake, but he yells that she should be on her knees begging for her life. Terrified, the boy clings tighter to his mother's clothes. She then offers 10 times the payment for him to let her son live. Unmoved, Guan tells her not to waste her breath on that request. He then reveals that her father has already been captured by his group of men. Hearing a noise, Guan turns his head, trying to identify what it was. From the shadows, Muguk emerges and silently neutralizes one of the henchmen. Not understanding a thing, one of the men asks who the hell that guy is. Taking a step forward, Muguk reveals himself to the entire group of enemies. Protecting the family, he warns that he was paid to get them to safety. At this, Dang Yang says he's just a mercenary who was left behind. Giving the order, Guan tells the traitor to handle the situation, and he moves forward. Muguk then asks if they're sure they're going to get paid. He then says it wouldn't be a surprise if they kept his share. Annoyed by his audacity, Guan asks how he dares to call them that. Then, Muguk warns that he would have done much worse if it weren't for the child. Thinking he's a fool, the leader wonders how he dares to speak like that. With a smile, Muguk asks if he happened to hit the mark. Shouting in fury, he orders his men to cut down that worm first. Then, Muguk asks if he heard that his head will be the next to roll. Hesitating for a moment, the traitor just stares at his former boss in silence. But one of Guan's men attacks him from behind with a swift strike. Confused, his eyes widen as he realizes he's been betrayed by the group. Right after, the blade pierces his chest, finishing the decisive blow. Uncaring, Guan complains that the fool didn't even do the job right. He then says he shouldn't have trusted a bum for this mission. Staring at the body, he says the man wrote his own tragedy today. Losing his patience, he orders his men to advance and get it over with. Just watching the scene, Muguk remains still and silent for a moment. Turning to the woman, he asks her to cover the boy's eyes and ears. Understanding the hint, she hugs her son and protects him with her hands. At high speed, he charges forward and cuts down the men coming at him. Spinning his body, he lands multiple strikes on all the surrounding enemies. Using the piercing step, he moves almost imperceptibly across the field. Appearing in front of the leader, he surprises him with his impressive speed. Confused, Guan asks when he got there, but it's already too late. In an instant, Muguk cuts down all the other henchmen with a single move. Right after, he runs his blade through Guan's neck. Terrified by the scene, Guan asks how this is even possible. Then, he asks who the hell he is, but Muguk throws the question back at him. Shouting, the woman reveals his name is Wan Guan, a servant. Then she introduces herself as Sa Yon Gyum, daughter of the Lord of the Golden Manor. He then reveals he hid his identity and came as a wandering swordsman. It's then shown that her father is a merchant and one of the richest men. Remembering the past, he knows that Asu was betrayed and killed by the servant. Upon hearing the revelation, Guan just stares at Muguk without saying a word. Seizing the opportunity, he lunges forward and tries to strike from behind. Turning his back, Muguk seems to completely ignore the enemy's attack, but he dodges the blade with a quick and surprising body movement. With the blow dodged, Guan's blade misses its target. Immediately after, he spins and strikes the traitor's neck with his sword. Shocked by the scene, she covers her mouth, unable to believe what just happened. Then he says that his group has a habit of stabbing people in the back. On her knees, she begs him to help them, calling him a noble hero. He then informs her that with this change, the price for his service has just gone up. Relieved, she says her family can pay any price he asks. With a slight smile, He accepts the proposal and tells them to get going. Laughing loudly, Asu celebrates his victory in front of all his men. He then shouts that he has finally captured the two of them, and his plan worked. Confused, he turns his head upon seeing someone unexpected arriving in the courtyard. Not understanding, he asks who he is and where the servant Won Guan is. Muguk then reveals that he is dead and that he was the sole survivor. Shocked, the leader wonders who could have finished off the servant Won. One of the men says it was a mysterious master, young and very handsome. Annoyed by the comment, the Lord asks why he's talking about the enemy. Unfazed, Muguk just stares silently at the Lord and his men. Then the Lord's eyes widen as he realizes the truth behind it all. Pointing at him, he shouts that Muguk was Won's real killer. With a smile, he says, "The Lord isn't completely blind after all." Without wasting time, the guards advance and surround the newcomer in the courtyard. Laughing at the situation, the Lord says it was a mistake for him not to have run away. He then replies that he doesn't see tigers, but mutts everywhere. Standing with his sword, one of the guards glares at the woman and child. Shocked by the situation, the Lord is left speechless, just watching the scene. He then realizes that Muguk came here and shows no fear. At that moment, he's certain that this was no ordinary swordsman. Changing his tone, he asks for his name and invites him for a drink. But Muguk tells him to stop the pleasantries and do what has to be done. Clenching his fist, he gives the order for all his men to kill him. Charging all at once, they run toward Muguk to begin their attack. Unfazed, he grips the hilt of his sword and readies himself. In an instant, he rushes forward and cuts down everyone in his path. Surprised, one of the guards wonders how he can be so fast, but before he can react, his head is sliced off by a clean strike. Moving like a blur, he continues to cut down all the enemies there. With a focused gaze, he clears the path with his sharp blade. Finally, he holds his sword, with the blood of his foes dripping from it. Amidst the carnage, his blade remains steady, stained with enemy blood. Shocked by the scene, the Lord's eyes widen, unable to look away. Facing the pile of bodies, Muguk stares at the Lord with a serious expression. Understanding nothing, the Lord asks who he really is. Great Master. Wiping his blade, he says he's just a mercenary with a nose for money. Believing the story, he asks how much money it would take to satisfy him. With a smile, he says it seems the Lord has quite a fortune. He then confirms that he has enough coins for a new life. Muguk then asks why he would steal his master's money instead of just using it. Annoyed, the Lord bites his lip, having no answer to that question. Suddenly, a guard shouts and tells him to drop his weapon on the ground. From the doorway, one of the guards appears holding Soyeon's father hostage. Desperate, she screams her father's name upon seeing him in such a dangerous situation. With a victorious smirk, the Lord faces Muguk, feeling in control. He then warns that if the young man refuses, Lord Guillaume will die right there. Raising his sword, Muguk ignores the threat and calmly faces the Lord. Slamming his sword on the ground, he opens a huge fissure that advances rapidly. Without stopping, the crack in the ground gets closer and closer to the two of them. Upon reaching the target, the fissure kicks up a cloud of dust in the courtyard. Then, the guard's blade is stopped by something, leaving him completely confused. From a distance, he uses his sword technique to stop the guard's attack. Seeing the unbelievable scene, the Lord screams, completely shocked and unable to react. With his hand on the hilt of his sword, he asks the Lord to repeat his threat. Taking a step back, the Lord stares at Muguk with wide eyes, shouting for him to wait. The Lord tries to stop Muguk's advance, but Muguk warns that it's too late for words and challenges him. Not knowing what to do, he just stares at the swordsman in silence. Analyzing the situation, he assumes his opponent doesn't have much energy left. Drawing his sword, he prepares for what seems to be his only chance. Then, he charges at Muguk with all his might, sword in hand. Unfazed, Muguk blocks the Lord's strike with his own blade. He then firmly holds against the impact of the attack, not retreating a single step. With their swords clashing, he decides to use all his strength in the attack. Pressing the strike, he tries to break Muguk's defense with everything he's got, but Muguk manages to hold the charge, the two blades grinding forcefully against each other. The swords clash again, creating a loud bang that echoes throughout the courtyard. Screaming in fury, he continues his desperate assault against the swordsman. In a flurry of blows, the blades meet once more with violence. Believing he's out of energy, the Lord lunges forward with everything. With a determined look, he keeps pressing the attack against the swordsman. Muguk struggles to block the blows, defending himself with apparent difficulty. Sensing an opportunity, he prepares for the blow that will end the fight. Suddenly, Muguk's blade pierces the Lord's chest, surprising him. Calling him pathetic, he says the Lord filled his life with greed. He then warns that his betrayal was a completely unforgivable sin. As his life fades away, the Lord faces his opponent one last time. Pulling the blade out, he finishes the Lord with a final move. The scene changes. The father of the family thanks the master with a bow. He then says he will never forget the kindness of saving his family. Wanting to know his name, he asks if he may have the privilege of learning it. Humbly, he replies that he is just a passing swordsman, my lord. Praising him, The Lord says that not even the wandering king could defeat him easily. Then the daughter reminds her father that he already promised to pay their savior. Praising his daughter, he says a promise backed by money is the most reliable kind. He then tells Muguk that if he's looking for coin, he's come to the right place. At this, Muguk reveals that he helped the family in disguise for this very reason. Moving to a hallway, they walk towards a very secure-looking vault. The Lord then says that giving him all his wealth wouldn't be practical. Agreeing, he says he wouldn't dare demand so much from the noble lord. Instead of a fixed amount, he proposes that Muguk take what he can carry. Surprised, Muguk asks if he can take as much as he can carry on his own. The Lord says yes, but he can't use a cart or any help. Muguk then warns that he might leave with more than the Lord thinks. Unconcerned, he replies that it's fair to reward him with that amount. Hearing the response, Muguk just stares at the Lord without saying another word. Bowing, he humbly accepts the proposal made to him. As the door opens, a loud bang echoes throughout the hallway. Facing the open door, Muguk prepares to enter the enormous vault. Taking a step, he enters the darkness of the vault without any hesitation. He then walks alone through the dark corridor, disappearing into the total gloom. Watching the scene, the father and daughter stand still at the vault's entrance. She then asks if her father is sure, as he might take a lot. The Lord replies by asking if there's anything in there more valuable than the two of them. Placing a hand on her shoulder, he says that having them safe is enough. Moved by his words, she just looks at her father with an emotional gaze. She agrees that he is strong, but the Lord says he is no ordinary man. He then explains that it wasn't just the young man's skills he noticed. He reveals that he has never met someone so young with such a calm presence. Explaining his logic, he says that money can be earned, but a connection cannot. Upon hearing the explanation, she just stares at her father in silence, understanding. Back in the present, Muguk walks through the corridors with his new resources. Arriving at the palace, he approaches the main building with firm steps. Climbing the stairs, he reveals that he sold the gold and treasures he took. Since it was a lot, he had to go to several shops to convert it all. In the end, he managed to get a total of 3,800,000 coins. Walking through the hall, he approaches the throne where his father is seated. Beside the throne, the strategist Myung-sama reports the latest important information. He then wonders if his father is happy with this life of decisions. Taking a step, he continues to walk through the grand palace hall. He then questions whether his father was forced to take that unwanted throne. Cheonma then comments that he heard he left the sect for a while. With a smile, Muguk replies that he was just out earning some coin, but his father looks at him with suspicion, saying he finds that very strange. Unfazed, he says he needs a lot of money for something important. At his response, the two stare at him, shocked by the young man's audacity. He then says he needs it to compete with the 8 demon lords. Cheonma denies the request, saying he cannot give his blessing for that. With his head down, Muguk just stares at the floor, listening to his father's answer. Unfazed, he says he didn't expect to get permission on the first try. Then, he takes out a scroll and says that it is for his father. Not understanding a thing, the strategist and Cheonma stare at the young man with curiosity. With a gesture, he sends the scroll floating towards his father. Using his energy, he throws the scroll, which stops right in front of Cheonma. Holding the records, he asks about the meaning of all that money. Muguk then reveals that it is his allowance, leaving his father shocked. With a smile, he confirms the information, surprising everyone in the hall. Not knowing how to react, the strategist looks away and pretends to cough. A smile spreading across his face, Cheonma just stares at his son without saying a word. Then, he states that he already has plenty of coin and doesn't need more, but Muguk replies that he knows he's the richest man in the world. He then reveals that the money is his first offering as a token of gratitude. Hearing these words, Cheonma remains silent, processing his son's declaration. Finally, he asks his father to accept his dream and bids him a polite farewell. Turning his back, Muguk begins to leave the grand audience hall. Then, Cheonma analyzes the records his son just handed him. With a slight smile, he continues to gaze at the exit his son just went through. Beside him, the strategist just watches the scene in complete silence. In the Huangchun pavilion, Muguk and An Li watch from the building's window. Beside her master, An Li attentively awaits his next orders. Then, she informs him that they are ready to receive him, chief supervisor. He listens to her from the side, his gaze fixed straight ahead. Suddenly, Daryong Seo appears and announces that everyone is waiting outside. With a faint smile, Muguk just stares at the figure who appeared before him. He then comments that it's a very familiar face. Seo explains that he thought Muguk would like to be escorted by someone he knew. Muguk then admits he didn't expect to see him again so soon. The two then face each other with a smile, ready for the new mission. Without a word, Muguk turns his head to look at An Li for a moment. Taking a step, he starts to leave the room with them. As he walks, he is followed closely by Daryong Seo and An Li. Leading the group, he walks with firm steps towards the exit. Together, the three of them leave the building and prepare for the new mission. Outside, a huge crowd of warriors waits in formation. Standing before them all, Muguk faces the crowd with a serious expression. With their hands clasped, they introduce themselves to the honored chief who has just arrived. Showing no reaction, he simply observes the scene in complete silence for a moment. Analyzing the group, he realizes the reception is warmer than he expected. Turning to Seo, he asks if someone threatened them to do this. With smiles, the crowd looks at their new chief with very lively expressions. Seo then explains it's because they saw what he did for them. At this, Muguk recalls the investigation into the Demon Guard. It's revealed that Captain Go killed the first investigator and injured the second. Remembering the scene, he helped the injured investigator and crushed Dang's head. With a smile, Seo suggests that a few words would be appropriate at that moment. Without answering, Muguk just faces the crowd waiting for his words. Swords in hand, the men wait in silence for what he has to say. Before everyone, the warriors in yellow remain standing in formation in the courtyard. Starting his speech, he says he doesn't know if their lives will get any better. Beside him, Seo and An Lee just listen to the new chief's words. He then guarantees that their hearts will race faster than ever before. Surprised, Seo's eyes widen upon hearing the promise made there. With smiles on their faces, the crowd seems excited by the chief's words. Clenching their fists, they show their excitement for the new command that has arrived. High above the pavilion, the blue sky opens up over the new leadership. Changing scenes, he complains they piled this up to kill him, but Seo defends himself, saying these are the cases he requested. Annoyed, he asks why the cases had to be related to the Blade Demon. Seo then explains they were recent cases that fit the request. Then, and Lee advises him to restrain himself, as Lord Gu is at his limit. He then hands over the scroll and tells her to cover it up if she thinks she can. Taking the document, she reads it carefully, her expression turning worried. Sighing, she agrees they can't let this situation slide. In a tavern, a man drinks alone, while another watches from the upper floor. Slamming his cup on the table, he shows all his anger and frustration. With a pained expression, he stares at the drink in front of him. Just then, the tavern owner approaches and says he's had too much to drink. He replies that wine is his only recourse in this difficult time. The owner complains that the scoundrels left his son in a coma and walked away. Not understanding, the man asks what he's talking about, since the office is investigating. Drinking more, he reveals that the investigators called it an accident. Slamming the table, the owner says the culprit's father is the White Cleaver, one of the Blade Demon's disciples. He leads a band of 100 demons. Shocked by the revelation, the tavern owner is speechless for a moment. Crushing his cup, he says the office's puppets are all crooked. Shouting, he tells them to let him be heard, and that the White Cleaver can come. At another table, Muguk tells the man he needs to pull himself together, but he laments that if his son doesn't wake up, he doesn't know what he'll do. Crying, he swears he'll get his revenge and then follow his son. But Muguk asks if he can really do that, and the man is surprised. Suddenly, a group of young men enters the tavern, interrupting the conversation. Seeing them, the man stands up, recognizing who has just arrived. Coming down the stairs, one of them asks who he is to talk like that. Rising in a fury, the man yells and tells him to bring his son back. With his eyes closed, the young man apologizes and swears it won't happen again. Bowing, he bends down in front of the man, who is left speechless. Raising his head, he says he already apologized, and the man is shocked. Unable to believe what he heard, the boy's father just stares at him, paralyzed. Laughing at the situation, the other young men mock the man's desperate face. Angrily, he draws his sword and prepares to attack the group. Before he can attack, the young man grabs him and prepares a strike. With a clean hit, he strikes the man's face, sending him flying. The young man yells down at the fallen man, shouting that everyone saw him draw his blade first. Laughing, one of the other guys confirms that they all saw it and are witnesses. Then, he continues to beat the fallen man, shouting that it's his fault. He then reveals that he told the boy to steal money, but he refused. Suddenly, he stops his attack, realizing he just confessed to everything. Confused, he asks what it was that he just confessed to. On the ground, the man says that everyone heard him admit to the attack. Realizing his mistake, he just looks away, unsure of what to do. Turning to the side, he tries to see how the other people are reacting. He then asks if anyone heard what he just said in the tavern. Without a word, everyone in the tavern just looks away, pretending they saw nothing. Seeing the silence, he looks down at the fallen man with a mocking gaze. With a smirk, he says it seems no one heard a single thing. Laughing out loud, he celebrates the fact that no one will testify against him. In despair, the man closes his eyes, having lost all hope for justice. His face covered in blood, he lets out a scream of pure anguish. With a smile, the young man says he's crying like a fool. At this, all the other young men start laughing at the fallen man's face. Suddenly, a voice says that he heard everything perfectly well. At the tavern door, Muguk appears with his team, surprising everyone. Suddenly, a voice says they heard everything perfectly well right there in the tavern. Walking down the hall, Muguk and his team suddenly enter the tavern. Annoyed, one of the guys asks which of the monkeys said that to them. Standing at the entrance, the three just stare at the group with very serious expressions. Staring him down, Muguk says he can imagine how the young man was raised. With nothing to say, the group of troublemakers falls silent. Lowering his head, the young man apologizes for getting carried away by his emotions, but he shouts that Muguk must have a death wish for meddling. With a smile, Muguk just stares at him without showing any reaction. He then says the cheap authority of the White Cleaver is ridiculous. Angry, the young man asks who he called a nobody in front of everyone. Just then, the tavern owner recognizes him and calls him Young Master Muguk. Surprised, everyone in the tavern wonders what he could be doing there. Shocked, the young man asks if he is the son of the Supreme Commander. Muguk then tells him to relax, as he's there as the pavilion's supervisor. At this, An Li says that should give him more reason to worry. Clasping his hands, the young man begs for forgiveness for not recognizing a nobleman. Muguk says that, judging by his actions, he's already a grown man. He then realizes the young man is smart enough to know when to bow. As he tries to leave, he's stopped by Muguk, who says he has business there. Surprised, the young man asks what kind of business he could have with him. With a serious look, Muguk just stares at the young man without a word. He then reveals he's there because of the assault he was involved in. Defending himself, he says he was already declared innocent by the officials. But Muguk informs him that he has decided to reopen the investigation into the entire case. Listing the crimes, he accuses him of extortion, robbery, and attempted murder. He then adds that, on top of everything, the young man also beat up the victim's father. With a look of disgust, he announces the penalty of 20 years in prison. Shocked, the young man asks if it's 20 years, not believing what he heard. He then tries to defend himself, saying it was just a training session that went wrong. He then reminds him that, as the chief, he heard his confession himself. Then, he repeats that he heard everything perfectly clearly and at the right moment. The young man then threatens him, saying his father won't accept this. But Muguk tells him not to worry about that detail. With a smile, he reveals he also plans to arrest his father. Screaming with fury, the young man says he won't get away with this. He keeps shouting that his father can kill him even from behind bars. With a single strike, Muguk blows up the head of one of the henchmen with him. Gushing a white fluid, the body falls lifelessly to the tavern floor. Spitting blood on the floor, the young man chokes on his own fear. Muguk then informs him his sentence has been increased to 30 years in prison. Desperate, he kneels and begs for forgiveness, crying non-stop. Unmoved, Muguk just stares at him with a cold, distant gaze. He then tells the young man to stop the nonsense and give him a good reason. Crying, he tries to say something, but can't find the right words. Muguk then asks if he has ever saved or helped anyone in his life. Then, he demands the young man say anything decent he's ever done. Crying and with nothing to say, he just stares at the floor in silence. Muguk then asks why he should forgive someone like him. Desperate, he promises he'll be a good person from now on. Before he can finish, Muguk hits him with a hard slap across the face. From the impact, he spits blood and falls hard onto the tavern floor. Lying on the ground, the young man just stares at the ceiling, his whole body aching. Lifting his head, he looks at Muguk, his face bloodied. Muguk then tells him to save that promise for when he gets out of jail. Unfazed, he just stares at the young man with a cold, serious look. At this, the other two henchmen become desperate and beg for their lives. Fearing they'll take the blame, they start confessing everything. Giving the order, he tells Seo to take them back to the pavilion. Watching the scene, the warriors in yellow observe the chief's team in action. With a bruised face, the man just stares at Muguk without saying a word. Then, he tells everyone to report any injustice they encounter. He then guarantees that as long as he's there, no external pressure will have any influence. Surprised, the other patrons in the tavern just watch the scene in silence. With a smile, he says he'll do the same to anyone who threatens them. Shocked, the two men look at each other, unable to believe what they just heard. Upstairs, two men start laughing at the unfolding situation. Laughing loudly, the tavern owner also celebrates the change that is happening, and Lee then reveals that the demon doctor took care of his son earlier. Surprised, the man asks what she said, not believing the news. Unable to believe it, he asks if it's true that a healer treated him. Muguk then says the boy missed his father and was already awake. With his eyes full of tears, he stares at Muguk, completely shocked by everything. Crying with joy, he begins to thank the young master for his help. Thanking him non-stop, he is comforted by Muguk, who calms him down. With a smile, Muguk says the man dedicated his entire life to the cult. He then adds that it is the cult's duty to protect him when he needs it most. At this, the man takes Muguk's hands, holding them tightly with gratitude. Thanking him 1,000 times, he says the master deserves all the blessings in the world. Beside them, and Lee and Seo just watch the scene with a moved expression. Wiping away a tear, the tavern owner denies that he's also crying. With a satisfied smile, Muguk looks at the man he just helped, but he says it's the cult that everyone should be thanking at that moment. From high up in the pavilion, Muguk just watches the scene unfolding below. On a scroll, he stares at his own face, his expression serious and determined. Outside, a group of officers gathers with unfriendly expressions. Introducing himself as Myung Gok, he apologizes and says they invited him there. Standing before them, Muguk asks the occasion for the meeting. Unfazed, he simply confirms he was the one who reopened the case. One of the officers says this undermines everyone's authority and morale. Facing the crowd, He just listens to the accusations in silence for a moment. Then, he asks if the rest of them feel the same as the officer. He then says he sees things a little differently than they do. Confused, they ask what he means by that strange statement. Moguk then reminds them that they all heard the young man's confession when they arrested him. After they all confirm, he asks what this whole situation is about. The officer repeats that it's about him reopening a case that was already closed. With a slight smile, he asks if this is a matter of principle. Confirming, the officer says it's an unprecedented act in the organization. Calling him by name, Muguk just stares at him with a serious gaze. He then asks if principle serves him or betrays him now, but the officer insists that principles are what make an organization. With his eyes closed, Muguk seems to ponder the words he just heard. Giving the order, he tells those who find the investigation justified to move to that side. Unsure what to do, the crowd of officers just stares at him, paralyzed. Taking a step, one of the men moves and crosses to the other side. Then, Daryong Seo says he believes the case should be brought to light. Muguk then asks his reason, and he says the investigation was flawed. Hearing the answer, the other officers just watch the scene in silence. Seo then adds that they can't rule out the possibility of outside influence. After the response, Muguk asks if anyone else agrees with Daryong Seo. Taking a step, another man says he shares the same sentiment. Introducing himself as Ho-ik, he thanks him for his help, and Muguk asks about the injury. Pleased, he says it's good to hear the man is recovering well. Just observing the crowd, he maintains his serious and focused expression. Calling him by name, Muguk summons him, leaving the officer quite surprised. He then says the officer was in command of the case and wants to know. Nervously, he replies that his investigation was complete and thorough. Unfazed, Muguk just stares at him in silence for a long moment. Suddenly, he asks if the officer accepted a bribe from the White Cleaver. Shouting, Myeonggok asks how he dares to make such an accusation. Unleashing his energy, Muguk glares at the officer with a threatening look. With authority, he warns that the officer should speak only when asked. Surprised by the scene, the other officers just watch everything in silence. Without showing emotion, Muguk keeps his gaze fixed on the man who interrupted him. Shouting, the officer swears on his life that he never accepted any bribe. He then says that if the chief doubts him, he will accept any investigation. With a slight smile, Muguk just stares at him without saying another word. Then he reveals that he already investigated and that he didn't take the coins. He then says it was a direct order from Cheonma himself for the case. Shocked, Myeonggok's eyes widen upon learning the order came from above. Muguk then says he was curious about why he buried the case. Nervously, he defends himself, saying he didn't bury the case at all. Suddenly, Muguk asks if the bastard threatened his younger sister. He then reveals that he dug deep because he thought everyone had a price. Looking to the side, he just stares at the group of officers in silence. Then, he says that, contrary to his guess, he is an honest man. He then questions why a man of principle would stop the investigation. Without hesitation, he reveals that the man's only weakness is his sister. Hearing the revelation, Myeonggok asks if he was really threatened. Shouting, he demands that Hwajong speak and say if he was blackmailed. Muguk then reveals he knows why Myong meddled in the situation. He explains that Myong is trying to protect his dear junior investigator. Muguk then says that if he's worried, he can relax a little. He then reveals that he has already sent guards to his sister's house. In disbelief, he asks if it's true that his sister is safe. With eyes full of tears, he stares at Muguk, waiting for confirmation. Kneeling, he shouts that he has committed the unforgivable and apologizes to the chief. But Muguk warns that nothing can excuse what he did. Crying, he says he will accept any punishment the chief decides to give. Hearing the answer, Myeonggok just watches the scene in silence. Giving the order, he tells the officer to stand. He then warns that if this had happened later, he wouldn't be so lenient. But since it happened before, he decides to grant Hwajong a pardon. Crying, he asks if the chief will really forgive him after everything. Then, Muguk says it wasn't his pardon that saved him today. He then says his reputation has been tarnished, and he expects him to rebuild it. Thanking the chief, he bows, moved by the second chance he received. Hoik then promises he will engrave his words in his heart. Kneeling, they all swear loyalty to the new chief with respectful bows. Hearing the promise, all the officers look at their new chief with admiration. With authority, he shouts that the pavilion will no longer yield to pressure. Standing in the middle of the courtyard, he faces the crowd with a serious expression. Next, he warns that if they encounter threats, they must inform him without hesitation. Shouting, he asks if they doubt his words and tells them to trust him. He then assures them that if necessary, he will beg his father for help. Turning to the side, he just faces the crowd for a brief moment. He then promises he will ensure they can carry out their duties. With a